Chapter 61, Teleportation, Take 2. Master, I'm fine now. Really good, the dumb beast murmured, its eyes glowing with soft blue light. At the same time, the steady beep of a heart monitor echoed in Ethan's mind. He smiled. There was no longer any trace of weakness. In fact, the readings that used to spike whenever the beast's spirit power dipped were now perfectly stable. Ethan reached out and gently stroked the creature's rosy head. "Don't scare me like that again," he chided, though his tone was warm. "Next time, just listen to me right away." The dumb beast leaned into the touch and closed its eyes in contentment. Then its eyes brightened once more, the blue glow intensifying. "Master, I'm fully recovered," it said through their bond. "I can use teleport again, and this time, I won't mess up." Ethan's eyebrows shot up. If the dumb beast could teleport even a short distance, they'd be almost back at their base. Of course, the skill could only send them to places the beast had already visited, and the closest familiar location was the waterfall in Zengjin Canyon. That spot would put them just a stone's throw from home. With renewed hope, Ethan nodded. "All right," he replied. "Let's try teleporting there." All things considered, this distance wasn't nearly as far. Compared to their last teleport, it was a fraction of the length, and Ethan was certain that once the dull beast had fully recovered its strength, covering it would be effortless. He offered a confident grin and nodded. "All right, let's do it again, and then we'll get dinner started." He lifted his hand and summoned the dark raven that had been perched in the treetops as a lookout. The bird swooped down at his call, folding its wings quietly as it landed on his outstretched arm. "Dark raven," Ethan said, "the beast has healed. Prepare to move in an instant. And Guisi, come out too." Since returning from their scouting mission, Guisi the ghost had been lingering in Ethan's shadow, reveling in its coolness and shelter. Now a soft, raspy chuckle drifted through the air as the spirit materialized, spiraling around the dull beast in gentle loops. He was clearly intrigued by the creature's raw magical power. In response, the beast let out a deep, rumbling cry, and Ethan could feel its thoughts merging with Guisi's in a quiet telepathic exchange. Despite its simple mind, the beast seemed to embrace a protective, older brother role toward these two smaller companions. Ethan stepped forward and placed a hand on Guisi's translucent form. "That's enough enchantment for now," he said with a warm smile. "Let's focus. Dinner won't cook itself." With that, he raised his other hand, ready to trigger their next teleportation and bring them one jump closer to home. Ethan grinned. "All right, you dumb beasts, let's get started." He watched as Guisi, the ghostly hound, stirred at his feet, his translucent form flickering with puppy-like eagerness. The other spirits were new recruits, raw and untrained, their ages no more than a blink in the endless span of ghost kind. Left to their own devices, they would frolic and scatter. For now, Ethan indulged them. With a low, amused chuckle, he called Guisi back. Obediently, the spectral creature drifted over, tail wagging in a silent plea, "See, I'm a good boy." As the lesser ghosts dispersed, Ethan turned his attention to Guisi's next trick. In an instant, the beast vanished, then reappeared, in a blur of teleportation. Each flash grew faster, the hound's command of spiritual energy noticeably tighter. Ethan's smile widened. He blinked, and suddenly they stood deep in an unfamiliar forest. Towering pines filtered slanted shafts of sunlight onto the soft, needle-strewn ground. Ethan paused, taking it in. Their breakneck journey through the mantis territory had scrambled his sense of direction, but this place stirred a memory he couldn't ignore. This was the very wood where he and the Dark Crow were once hunted by the Rada, a crossroads of fate, and the spot where Ethan first met the creature that would become his greatest ally. Ethan Nen, knelt amid the moss-clad stones, listening as Dark Crow swooped down and landed on a shattered flagstone. The obsidian feathers along its wings ruffled with excitement. It jabbed a claw at the cracked earth and let out a victorious caw. "We've been here before," it croaked. "When the Rada hunted us, we drove them right through this clearing and lost them in the woods beyond." Ethan's lips curved into a pleased smile as he reached out to stroke the bird's glossy back. The crow inclined its head in acknowledgement, its bright eyes fixed on him. At the edge of the ruins, Guisi, Ethan's newest spirit companion, stepped forward, curiosity shining on his featureless, ghostly mask. "Tell us more," he prompted softly. As the eldest and self-styled elder brother of Ethan's bound spirits, Dark Crow began to recount their past battle. How, under a waning moon, he'd cut down the ambushing quartet and scattered the invading Rada into retreat. Each detail was delivered with calm authority, tinged by that slight, knowing shake of the head that bespoke both pride and amusement at the memory. Since Geesey joined their little company, Ethan could feel a fresh spark in the air. His spirits seemed livelier, more eager. Dark Crow, the first spirit to bind himself to Ethan, had always carried the heaviest burden, reliable, warlike, but sparing of words. Its fierce loyalty needed little reinforcement. Dumbbeast, the second spirit, was a creature of few sounds, a stoic guardian whose stubborn steadiness had seen Ethan through darker moments. When only the two of them traveled together, conversation never rose above growls and nods. Then came Geesey, the mischievous, ephemeral elf whose laughter drifted like wind through autumn leaves. He had an uncanny gift for smoothing tensions. Whenever Crow's sharp edge met Beast's blunt reserve, Geesey would slip between them with a teasing grin, lighting the mood and stitching their differences back into harmony. Ethan rose and brushed the dried leaves from his trousers. His three allies, Dark Crow, Dumbbeast, and Geesey, formed a living circle at the heart of these ruins. Their shared history hummed between them, a promise that together they could face whatever new dangers the world might throw their way. Ethan hesitated at first. He knew these moments of quiet companionship were rare among his ragtag group, but the sun was sinking fast. If they didn't have a fire before dark, moving at night would be next to impossible. He rose to his feet and called out, "All right, that's enough rest. Black ravens, hunt us some hares and pheasants. Phantom, gather firewood. And you two beasts, set up the tent." At his command, the ravens instantly fell silent. Without a peep of protest, they darted off into the twilight. The two hulking beasts grumbled, but lumbered toward the camp's designated clearing. Phantom, a translucent wisp of a ghost, floated behind his assigned task, already eager. Within an hour, night had fallen and they'd built a crackling fire at the camp's center. The ravens returned first, beaks busy tearing into fresh kills. Though their feathers drooped with drowsiness, their bellies were full. The beasts lay on their sides, too stuffed to stir. Only Phantom hovered restlessly, utterly unburdened by hunger. As a spirit, he didn't need food, but he could sustain himself on concentrated energy, and Ethan hadn't prepared any energy crystals for him yet. So tonight, Phantom's meal would be the faint residue of dying life clinging to the carcasses the ravens had caught. He drifted closer, absorbing that lingering aura with a fascinated gleam in his ghostly eyes, while the rest of the camp settled in for the night's uneasy quiet. Night had fallen over the training ground, and Ethan surveyed his three charges. The sleek dark raven perched on a rock, the lumbering foolish beasts gathered at his feet, and the restless ghosts hovering at the edge of the clearing. He'd just offered them a taste of his new elixir. Raven and the beasts had devoured every drop, savoring it like a fine meal. When the ghosts tried it, however, they barely managed to sip before recoiling in embarrassment and spitting it out. Humiliated, they gave up entirely. Ethan stretched and clapped his hands. "All right, break's over. Let's let that settle before lights out." At once, Dark Raven and the foolish beasts sprang to their feet, eyes bright with anticipation. The ghosts, though still puzzled, fell into line as well, ready to follow his lead. Ethan pointed toward a towering oak at the edge of the clearing. "Raven, start with your shadow wave technique, 50 repetitions, then unleash 100 wing assaults on that tree. I want to see your feathers cut through the bark." He turned to the beasts next. "You lot, focus on your psychic training. Today, each of you will hoist these 5 stone weights, 500 lifts apiece. Your powers are growing too fast for slack workouts." Finally, he regarded the ghosts. "And you, use your speed. You're on shuttle runs between those 2 pines. I want 2,000 laps. Let's test your endurance." Under the silver glow of the moon, Raven, beasts, and spirits alike launched into their exercises, each pushing their limits under Ethan's watchful eye. "It looks like the chapter text itself didn't come through. Could you please paste the full passage you'd like me to revise? Once I have the content, I'll reshape it into a smooth, idiomatic English version with Ethan as the hero." Chapter 62, Ghost Training Path, Part 2. For Ghost, this was his first time joining the regimented training sessions, so Ethan still didn't know exactly how much stamina he could handle. He decided to err on the side of caution and gave him the same regimen as the others. "Match the rest of the squad," Ethan instructed. As soon as he finished speaking, Ghost disappeared toward the practice field. Turning his attention back to his spirit companions, Ethan oversaw Dark Crow's drill first. The Crow's opening exercise was called Evil Wave. This technique channels raw demonic energy into a single focused blast, so concentration on gathering and directing that wicked power is critical to maximizing its destructive force. Next came the Wing Assault drill, Dark Crow's signature aerial offense. Part of the attack derives from condensing flight energy along its wingspan, sharpening each beat of its wings into a slashing strike. The rest comes from channeling the Crow's raw physical strength into every gust, transforming its wings into lethal weapons in midair. Meanwhile, Ethan evaluated the training plan for the dummy beast, a strange spirit hybrid with both water and superpower attributes. Though its aquatic talent was respectable, it still lagged behind the beast's latent superpowered potential. That's why Ethan concentrated on honing its superpower core, using its water skills to support and enhance that growth. Once fully developed, the dummy beast would be a true mobile turret, able to unleash devastating superpower barrages while staying afloat on its natural water affinity. Satisfied with everyone's schedules, Ethan stepped back and watched as Dark Crow summoned another wave of dark energy. Dummy Beast ripped jets of pressurized water from the air, and Ghost struck out toward his own battlefield challenges. This was only the beginning of their next stage of growth, and Ethan was determined to see them all evolve into legends. Ethan studied the spirit's data readout. This Menguisi ghost, born of both the ghost system and the poison system, boasted sky-high special attack and speed stats, but its defense and hit points were notoriously fragile. Neither a ghost nor its evolved ghast form ever aimed for a lightning-quick knockout. Instead, they fought wars of attrition. Their ghostly onslaughts, combined with persistent poison damage, slowly but surely wore foes down, so long as the Menguisi could survive the opening exchange. That frailty was its greatest risk. A single binding spell from an elf could wipe it out before it ever unleashed its true power. Survival became the top priority. Once it stayed in the fight, every passing second meant more cumulative damage dealt. Luckily, speed was the Menguisi's greatest gift. With reflexes unmatched by virtually any opponent, it could dodge or outpace incoming strikes. Layer on a repertoire of crowd control and debilitating poison techniques, and facing a Menguisi ghost turned into a nightmare of relentless assaults and creeping toxins. The longer the battle dragged on, the sooner the enemy would fall apart, just the way Ethan intended. Ethan's battle plan revolved around one key partner, his ghost Pokémon. In his mind, Ghost only needed to perfect 5 techniques: Hypnosis, Dream Eater, Rest, Sleep Talk, and a potent poison-type move to become truly unstoppable. Seamlessly combined, those skills would form a single, devastating tactic capable of eating even experienced foes alive. That made Ghost the centerpiece of Ethan's team. By guiding Ghost to evolve into Genguai, and then securing the right Super Evolution Stone, Ethan knew he could vault into leapfrog battles, or even challenge opponents well beyond his current rank. When Ethan finally returned to the rocket base, it was 24 hours after leaving Lada territory. Rather than hurrying back, he'd used the journey to drill his Pokémon and boost their levels. His top priority had been Ghost, the team's original underdog. Thanks to daily support from Dark Crow and the ever-reliable Drowsy Beast, Ghost had Smore hot up through the ranks, ready at last to put Ethan's ruthless new strategy to the test. Ethan glanced at his Pokégear with satisfaction. In just one day, he'd jumped from level 10 to level 14. The relentless battles, fueled by Dark Crow and Brute's support, had transformed his Ghost into a fearless fighter, always itching to challenge every wild elf it encountered. That single-minded drive had paid off in full. 4 levels in 24 hours. Not to be outdone, Dark Crow and Brute each gained a level themselves, now sitting at 20 and 22. Ghost's habit of rushing headlong into matches against stronger elves often ended in defeat, so he'd rope Dark Crow or Brute into helping him get revenge. And in the process, they'd gotten stronger too. After a day of nonstop skirmishes, Ethan finally returned to the clearing at the edge of the forest. He knelt and called, "Brute, you shouldn't be roaming free here. Let's head back to the Elf Center and rest up." He pulled out the beast ball and coaxed the pink hulking creature inside. Brute's bright coloration made him easy to spot, exactly the kind of attention Ethan wanted to avoid, so he tucked the beast ball safely into his pack before setting off toward home. Ethan's true safeguard on the island wasn't the trials at all, but the handful of official Team Rocket operatives stationed here, veterans who'd seen real bloodshed and warfare. As long as the reward was high enough, there were always those willing to take risks. Sure, big names like Viper and Shadow looked down on these foot soldiers, but their more capable lieutenants respected them. I handed the incubator holding Kira's eggs to Ghost and instructed him to slip into the shadows, incubator in tow. Then I strode into the rocket base with Darkcrow at my side. The long, ridged corridor was as familiar as ever, but this time Ethan felt no dread. They say that with greater strength, your view of the world changes, and that described Ethan perfectly now. At his command were 2 green-tier Pokémon, one at level 20, the other a gifted level 14 Ghost, alongside precious items like Earthcore Milk and Darkstone. With spirits and resources galore, he no longer saw himself as a mere trainer. To him, Team Rocket's presence here no longer cast an overwhelming shadow. Ethan stepped onto the ridge of the base in a far different frame of mind than his very first return. Where Rocket Square had once been eerily empty, it now swarmed with activity. Trial candidates hustled to and fro, rocket soldiers stood at attention in neat clusters, and shuttlecraft, hot and humming, taxied across the courtyard. As he passed through the outer gate, Ethan noticed a handful of specialists, distinguished by their dark eyeliners, disband into the square. 3 or 4 at least, all moving with purpose. Interesting, he mused. The base seems busier than ever. A crooked smile tugged at his lips. News of his comeback had flown through the intelligence channels, and before long every high-ranking officer within the walls knew he'd returned. Sure enough, a small delegation emerged from the dormitory wing, led by a tall man whose posture exuded authority. They marched straight into Rocket Square, each flanked by an elf guardian, except the leader, who had 2 at his side. Aside from their head, none of their faces looked familiar to Ethan. He paused at the edge of the crowd, letting the commotion wash over him. Whatever game was afoot, it was clear the stakes had just been raised. Chapter. The group raced across the courtyard, hearts pounding with a heady mix of nerves, excitement, and fear, each of them desperate not to fall behind. Guided by Wu Dang, they burst into the central square and froze. There, standing alone beneath the moonlit sky, was Ethan. Ethan broke into a run the moment he spotted them. His pace quickened, and the others hurried to catch up, their faces etched with relief and lingering tension. When Wu Dang reached Ethan's side, his features softened into a complicated blend of astonishment and joy. "Master, you're back," Wu Dang whispered, red, voice thick with emotion. Ethan drew a slow, steady breath, fatigue tugging at his limbs but determination lighting his eyes. At his side stood Sky, battle-worn yet unbowed. Between them they carried their prize, the gas canisters that once belonged to Soros, now securely in their possession. Author's note: thank you to everyone who voted for, recommended, and added my story to your collections. A special shout-out to those who gifted Hibiscus Awards. I'm deeply grateful for your support. Chapter 63, Rewards and Penalties, Part 3. Sky stood beside Ethan, clutching an aber snake in one hand and a gas bomb in the other, his face pale with fear. Then, as if on cue, he dropped to one knee. Behind him, nearly 20 others followed suit in an instant, their voices ringing out in unison. "Master Ethan!" The sharp declaration cut through the bustle of the plaza. Passers-by paused mid-stride, turning to stare in surprise. There, at the center of the square, Ethan remained standing, while Sky and his assembled followers bowed before him. Ethan narrowed his eyes and surveyed the kneeling crowd. A handful of them were familiar faces, independent operatives with solid reputations. His chip scanner hummed to life, running through each elf's profile. On average, their elves were level 17, well within acceptable qualifications. 2 of them even boasted orange-grade elves at comparably high levels. Ethan gave a single, measured nod. He couldn't help but respect Sky's resourcefulness, In just a few days, he had recruited a capable force worthy of such a display. Clearly, Sky deserved a closer look, and perhaps a reward for pulling it off so swiftly. Sky reappeared at the entrance, his arms loaded with Soros's gas canisters. Not only had he recovered every last bomb, he'd also managed to reconfigure them, boosting their strength beyond the originals. Silence fell over the room as he set them down. After a moment, Ethan spoke quietly. "Everyone, rise." At his voice, Sky lifted himself to his feet and fell into step beside Ethan, intentionally keeping his head lower. Behind them, Boa and Nitro, Sky's two closest lieutenants, huddled together, eyes wide with fear. Nitro in particular recoiled when he caught sight of Ethan and Dark Raven standing at the front of the group. His face went even paler. 20 or so men who'd been kneeling scrambled up as Sky did. Heads stayed bowed, none dared speak. They watched Ethan, undisputed leader of the operation, with furtive glances, sweat beading on their brows. A few wiped their temples anxiously, but when Ethan gave no sign of displeasure, relief washed over them. Ethan turned to Sky, offering him a warm, respectful smile. "Outstanding work, Sky." Sky dipped his head and returned the smile. "Thank you, sir. It was my duty, and well, I couldn't have pulled it off without your reputation and these gas canisters." He gestured at the bombs, then hesitated, as if suddenly aware of how odd it sounded. Ethan gave a small nod. "You've done more than enough. We'll discuss the upgrades shortly. For now, let's get these secured." With that, the tension in the room eased, and the men moved forward to carry the enhanced devices away under watchful eyes. Chapter 7: Unspoken Fears. Ethan leaned back in the weathered leather chair, the glow of a lone lantern casting long shadows across the assembled faces. In under a week, he'd gathered 20 fighters, mercenaries, scouts, rogue trainers, from every corner of Soros. With Fox now in command of this ragtag force, he'd forged them into a single, terrifyingly capable unit. Yet whispers circulated about the lengths he'd gone to recruit them. A few had arrived willingly, seduced by promises of gold or glory. Others had operated solo, reluctant to relinquish their independence, until Ethan's reputation and raw strength proved impossible to ignore. These newcomers were the least cowed of his followers, openly speculating what their leader would do next. But tension still crackled beneath their bravado. None felt that tension more keenly than Sky, who sat forward, face half obscured by the lantern's flicker. He was the one who had finally spoken up, exposing Ethan's darkest tactic, the deployment of a prototype gas bomb in Soros. "I resisted," Sky admitted, voice low. "I've always been a strategist, not a murderer. But Ethan left me no choice. He offered me rank and influence, threatened me if I refused. In the end, I complied." His confession landed like a stone. Ethan's image as an unflinching powerhouse solidified in every D present. Through a mix of coercion and calculated reward, he'd corralled their loyalty. And that gas bomb, handed to Sky by Ethan himself, remained the most damning proof. Possession of that weapon had catapulted Sky from a mid-level trainer into the upper ranks overnight. A heavy silence fell. Biska, seated by the firelight, stared at his boots, each breath shaking. He yearned to challenge Ethan's morality, but couldn't summon the courage to speak. Ethan studied them all with calm, inscrutable eyes. He tapped the table once. "Questions," he said quietly. "Who dares?" No one stirred, yet every soul in the room knew the reckoning had only just begun. Ethan and Sky had never been close. Sky only began to understand Ethan after his recent defeat. Ethan wasn't sure whether Sky would harbor any resentment over what happened. When Sky hesitated, Ethan fixed him with a hard, unblinking stare. Normally composed, Sky felt a chill creep over him. Sweat beaded on his brow under Ethan's intense gaze. "I said you did well," Ethan snapped, his tone sharp. "I care about results, not the process." Sky realized what Ethan feared. Half-hearted effort might follow if left unchecked. Though Ethan claimed not to care how the work got done, he understood the need to remind Sky where the priorities lay. Yes, Sky blurted out, bowing even lower, too nervous to wipe the sweat from his forehead. He kept nodding desperately. The 24 onlookers dared not draw a breath. They just felt a pulse of raw, murderous intent roll off Ethan, and it stunned them into stillness. Across the room, Bai, herself unsettled, straightened her back and forced her nerves under control. Leaning back with quiet satisfaction, Ethan allowed a faint smile to play at the corner of his mouth. Ethan watched as Sky surveyed the assembled crowd with that characteristic cool detachment. He had no idea why Sky had called so many people here. Then again, Sky always insisted he didn't care about the process, only the result. He was supremely confident in his ability to steer the outcome, and to him, these gathered souls were nothing more than chess pieces. Win or lose, it barely mattered. Still, since this was meant to be a grand affair, Sky decided a few gestures of goodwill were warranted. "If you perform well," Sky announced, voice ringing out across the hall, "you'll be rewarded. Hand me your ID cards, and I'll transfer 1,000 points to each of you." A hush fell over the room. 1,000 points at a stroke. Most had never even seen that many. Some participants didn't yet have 100 points to their names. Then Sky's gaze settled on a lithe figure at the edge of the crowd. "And you, Fox," he continued, "you've done exceptionally well. 200 points for you." A ripple of surprise swept through the onlookers. Sky's system of rewards and penalties was ruthless, palace policy, he liked to remind them, but undeniably effective. Fox bowed his head in stunned gratitude. He'd toiled through a dozen missions to amass just over 100 points, and now one simple recognition had doubled his total. Ethan allowed himself a small smile. With stakes like these, things were bound to get interesting. All 20 competitors turned their eyes to Fox, their expressions a mixture of envy and resentment. Secretly, I vowed to do whatever it took to win Ethan's favor and earn more points for myself. Among the group, only a few whispered their jealousy of Sky's 1,000-point haul. Everyone knew his skills far outmatched theirs, and besides, he was Ethan's closest confidant. But Fox's rewards sparked something more vicious: naked jealousy. Just for arriving half a day ahead of everyone else, he'd already secured a 200-point bonus. That small advantage stung especially those who fancied themselves his equals, or better. Sensing the tension, Ethan met their glares with a calm, calculating gaze. "Do well out there, and you'll be rewarded," he announced. "Afterward, you'll be free to choose points, elves, or equipment." At his words, every pair of eyes in the room gleamed with ambition. I could almost taste the determination in the air. Everyone was itching to prove their loyalty, complete the mission, and claim every reward Ethan offered. Please don't forget to bookmark, favorite, and recommend. 3 updates every day. Today's installment is complete. Chapter 64. Uninteresting Guga, my wed. Needless to say, within Team Rocket, points, the organization's universal currency, are far more useful than alliance tokens. Rumors had already begun to swirl among the ranks. Sky, Pokémon Division Manager, must have obtained the new gas bombs from Ethan himself. Some even whispered that with weapons like those in their hands, they could easily unseat Sky and take her post. Their reward catalog only fueled the speculation. It stretched from common leaf and apple potions to elusive TMs carrying rare skills, all the way to priceless relics. Then Ethan raised the stakes. He unveiled a massive, ornate cake as the grand prize, stipulating that Soros would earn it by reaching 1,000 points. Nobody doubted his word. Just like that, Ethan's influence rippled outward. Whether it was the small faction on Trial Island or the larger contingent of testers, they all fell under his sway. Yet this proliferation of rival groups is precisely Team Rocket's method. Under Sakazaki's leadership, the organization is divided into multiple major clans, and each of those clans spawns numerous sub-factions. They compete fiercely, pushing one another to grow stronger. That internal rivalry is exactly what transformed Team Rocket from a third-rate gang into a behemoth capable of challenging the Pokémon League. So long as Sakazaki deftly maintains the balance of power among his factions, this vast apparatus remains firmly under his control. Ethan was the sort of man who carried unshakable self-confidence, and his magnetic charisma only fueled his followers' eagerness to outdo one another rather than resist him. Of course, his reputation for raw power, especially his mastery of the shadow technique, didn't hurt either. After dispatching his foes and rewarding Galileo for his loyalty, Ethan swiftly brought the entire squad under his command. As long as he remained strong, any dissent was easily snuffed out. "All right, let's get ready," Ethan said. "We'll wait here until the test begins." "Yes, Master Ethan." Sky bowed deeply. "We've claimed our own meeting spot." The guys upstairs in the dormitory have even built us a lobby out front. Ethan's eyes brightened. Sky's knack for logistics always impressed him. With a nod, he gathered the others. "Lead the way," he said. Sky guided them toward the dormitory complex, but once they reached the wide stone plaza, Ethan paused. The square teemed with activity, not just exam candidates, but Team Rocket troopers scurrying about as well. "What's all this fuss about?" he asked, surveying the crowd. Sky opened his mouth to explain, but before a word could pass his lips, a sudden shout rang out from the far side of the square. Bien Sky's argument died on his lips as a squad of cadets marched in, led by Guga. Guga was tall and lean in the crisp white Rocket Corps uniform, his short, tawny hair framing eyes that bored into Ethan with disconcerting intensity. He strode directly in front of Ethan and interrupted Sky with a cool authority. "The assault test is only one part of the evaluation," Guga announced. "From now on, any lower-ranked cadet who believes himself stronger than his superior may issue a formal challenge. Win, and you claim his position. Lose, and you die." At the chilling words, life or death, Ethan's gaze flickered with lethal resolve. Guga's curt smile revealed that he saw Ethan as his only true rival, and he wasn't hiding the fact that he'd like to see Ethan fall. Ethan met Guga's stare without flinching. If there was ever a time to push him, now wasn't it? He raised an eyebrow. "So you're ready to start a war with me?" Guga's posture stiffened. Even Bien Sky, usually so quick to bicker, seemed convinced battle was imminent. But Ethan merely smirked. He knew Guga's temper and his ambition better than anyone. This was exactly the kind of boasting he'd been expecting. Ethan loved a good challenge. He had the heart of a true competitor. But he wasn't reckless. He knew that turning this into a free-for-all would only invite chaos. With too many F-iters, luck would decide the victor more than skill. Gurga snorted in disgust, every bit annoyed by Ethan's cool confidence. "Don't go thinking you're the top dog just because you got lucky once. You want to challenge me? Prove yourself first, then we'll talk." Ethan's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Oh, is that a challenge? I'm listening." The look in Gurga's eyes turned hard with irritation. Every time he'd stormed that doorway with all his strength, Ethan had met him with the same unshakable calm, as if Gurga's blows simply vanished into thin air. It drove him insane. "You're asking for trouble," he growled. Ethan held his ground without a word. Gurga's face flushed crimson and darkened with rage. His knuckles whitened around a clenched fist. Only the looming final exam kept him from lashing out. Beside Gurga, the aber snake coiled impatiently, its long, cold eyes locked on Ethan. The creature hovered at the ready, waiting for its master's command. Ethan's camp was rife with dark crows, while across the field in Guga territory, the aber snakes held sway. The leader of the dark crows had been watching the aber snakes closely, itching for an opportunity to strike. He was supremely confident that if the aber snakes made the first move, he'd be there to cut them down before they could even mount an attack. Not long after, Guga, second in command of the aber snakes, stepped forward to confront Ethan again. But the words wouldn't come. He could only snort in frustration, rally his warriors, and turn away in disgust. Every time Guga faced Ethan, it felt like a personal humiliation. His men stood silent and stiff, cowed by Ethan's cool stare and unflinching posture. As Guga led his troops off the field, his face was a mask of bleak resignation. Normally brash and overconfident, he'd been put in his place time and again, and this time was no different. His soldiers kept their heads bowed, desperate to avoid earning Ethan's wrath, fearful that a single misstep would see them beaten senseless. Yet Guga knew better than most that he couldn't afford outright defiance. His men were relying on him to get them off the trial island alive, and only Ethan's brother, with his formidable influence, could guarantee them safe passage. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but Guga and the aber snakes would have to play by Ethan's rules if they ever hoped to make it home. Chapter text. What no one realized was that Guga had never planned to rely on his brother. He was determined to prove himself, painstakingly mapping out Trial Island and intent on facing its dangers through his own strength. As Guga set off, Ethan couldn't help but laugh. Guga's swagger didn't annoy him. In fact, it reminded Ethan of himself. He'd always said that true villains proudly wear their hypocrisy like a crown. Still, if Guga ever chose to stand against him, Ethan wouldn't hesitate to meet him head-on. The dormitory lay just over a kilometer from the central plaza, yet the 20 new recruits felt they'd marched for hours. Having secured first place in the initial tests, Ethan carried a heavy burden of expectation. Midway along the dusty path, the group ran into Guga. Blades were drawn in an instant as some recruits braced for combat, uncertain whether they had permission to fire. Fortunately, it was a false alarm. No shots rang out. When Ethan finally arrived at the building that Sky had described, he stopped in his tracks. Though the structure was constructed entirely of wood and looked roughly hewn, its colossal size far exceeded anything he had imagined. It looks like I only received a brief snippet. Could you please provide the entire chapter you'd like me to rewrite? Once I have the full text, I'll transform it into a smooth, idiomatic English version, with Ethan as your male lead. I stepped into the hall and took in the vast space. In the center stood a raised platform, crowned by an imposing throne-like chair. Without hesitation, Ethan strode forward, settled himself into the seat, and watched as the dark crow swooped up to perch on the chair's tall backrest, its sharp eyes sweeping over the procession below. From his lofty vantage point, Ethan surveyed the two orderly rows of figures standing before him. The view, looking down on everyone at once, sent a faint thrill through him. Even in his previous life, he had never occupied such a commanding seat. Sky moved to the front of the assembly and stepped forward. "Master Ethan," he began, voice clear and steady, "we now number 26, you included. Our average scores hover around 40, though a few of our teammates score in the 20s or even the teens. Taken together, we represent one of the strongest forces in this base." Ethan inclined his head in acknowledgement, signaling Sky to continue. Sky reported without hesitation, "Other than your first-place finish, no one's dared to challenge us. In just 2 days, we've already banked 237 points. You'll see them on my ID card." He paused, then explained the island's unspoken rule. You earn asylum by contributing your influence, but you must hand over 20% of every reward as a protection fee. For now, all those points are credited to you, boss. Any new contributions will be paid out immediately. Ethan barely looked up. A few hundred points meant nothing to him. He could spend 1,000 without a second thought. A squad of trainers carried little weight here. On Trial Island, they were no more than low-level rocket grunts, and even the Global Rocket Organization counted for little in this environment. Yet the survivors who made it this far often showed far greater potential than the average rocket operative. Ethan had assembled this ragtag force simply to scout out the strongest recruits he could later bring into Rocket's higher ranks. With Sky's briefing concluded, he dismissed him with a curt nod. There were bigger plans in motion than tallying points on an island nobody else dared conquer. Ethan had never been one for traveling in a big group of men, neither in his past life nor in this one. He preferred his own company, and only when he was with his elves did he truly feel at ease. He'd thought about handing everything over to Sky's management team. After all, Ethan still saw himself as the shopkeeper. But to his surprise, Sky proved to be exceptionally gifted at organization and leadership. If the young manager remained dependable, he might become Ethan's first real recruit for the Rockets. "Don't let me down, Sky," Ethan murmured as he stepped out of the hall, the dark crow flitting after him. Because the serpent had altered the exam's rules, the test was now set for the afternoon. Back at the Rockets base, most of the training couldn't be conducted on the spot, and mindless beasts were better off inside their Pokeballs than paraded around here. As for the ghosts, Ethan's secret operatives, they too would remain hidden for now. With the exam still hours away, Ethan decided to swing by the exchange office first and submit his film assignment on the way. Ethan pushed open the door to the exchange office and immediately noticed how different the place felt today. On his earlier visits, the hall had been cold and nearly empty. Now it buzzed with activity. Trainees who'd grown accustomed to the harsh living conditions and the constant struggle for survival moved confidently between counters, clutching their point tallies as they traded for weapons, rations, medical kits, anything that might give them an edge in the next trial. Ethan, by contrast, still struggled to earn more than a few dozen points per mission. The higher-value contracts were either far too difficult for him or snapped up by stronger, faster competitors. He'd learned the hard way how precious every single point was, and he'd grown cautious about spending them. Today, he'd finished a minor assignment early and decided to risk stepping into the melee. Since a new round of tests was set to begin that afternoon, everyone else was deep in last-minute preparations, swapping gear, stocking up on supplies, comparing strategies. No one paid Ethan much heed as he made his way to the counter, where a familiar face suddenly called out to him. Aya was perched on a stool at one end of the desk. Her dark hair was pulled back, and her eyes lit up the moment she saw him. She waved him over, and Ethan offered her a quick, grateful smile as he joined her side. The exchange officer glanced up, surprised. There was a warmth in his expression that Ethan hadn't seen before in this place. "Ethan," he said, "I didn't expect you back so soon." Ethan set his modest stack of points on the counter and returned the smile. "I wrapped up faster than I thought," he replied. Inside, his heart was pounding, both from relief at having extra time and from the worry that he still wouldn't have enough points for the supplies he desperately needed. Aya nudged him and leaned in conspiratorially. "Let's see what you can get today," she whispered, eyes scanning the display boards. "Trust me, there are a few new items that'll give you a real advantage." Ethan nodded. He watched as the officer tapped through the menu of gear: lightweight armor, enhanced field rations, energy vials, and silently calculated his options. Here, in this crowded exchange room, every point could mean the difference between coming on top and falling behind. And today, Ethan was determined not to make the same mistakes twice. "The elder said that if I needed anything, I could come straight to him," Ethan repeated, then nodded in silent acknowledgement. He still couldn't believe how casually they'd handled his assignment. After all, he was only a low-rank trainer, but here was the deputy leader of the Shadow Group, one of the most formidable kings, personally overseeing every detail from the moment he arrived. No one else in the compound seemed to notice, but the quartermaster had quietly opened a hidden door just for him. Behind it lay a narrow, dimly lit corridor. The first time Ethan walked these halls, he'd been a tangle of nerves and conflicting emotions. Now, strangely, he felt calm. He remembered He Ying's words. As long as he proved useful, no one would dare harm him. They'd even awarded him the Shadow Reserve Member's Medal, a token that marked him as one of their own. The room at the end of the passage was unmistakable, same polished bookshelf, same heavy desk. But this time, the figure behind it was no longer shrouded in that ominous black robe. Ethan's eyes widened at his true appearance. Coffee brown hair so pale it looked drained of color, likely from months without sunlight. His skin was nearly translucent, his cheekbones and jaw sharply defined. Unfazed, the man sat back in his chair, idly flipping through a thick tome as if expecting Ethan all along. Ethan took a steadying breath and stepped forward. This was the real Shadow Group, at least as close as he'd ever been allowed to see. And now they were waiting for him. Ethan stepped into the chamber with the same delicate poise that often made people mistake his slender hands for a woman's, one hand bearing a faint scar where a finger had once been, the other perfectly intact, its long tapered fingers poised like an artist's. He wore a simple black tunic that only highlighted how alert and capable he looked. Wu Ying smiled as he entered. "You've returned," she said, her tone warm but measured. There was none of the surprise I'd expected. She clearly believed in his success. Ethan inclined his head, then moved to the lacquered desk at the room's center. From the satchel at his side, he retrieved a small, translucent sphere, the Gengui spirit orb, and set it before her with quiet respect. As Wu Ying lifted the orb, her expression flickered with something between relief and concern. Inside the sphere, the spirit lay curled in a pool of silvery light. At the movement of Wu Ying's fingers, it stirred. Gengui woke with a languid stretch, its eyes immediately fixed on her. It offered a plaintive look, as though silently chiding her. "Are you upset with me, Gengui?" Wu Ying murmured, a touch of ruefulness in her voice. The orb pulsated softly in her hand as she fastened it to the ornate buckle at her waist. Turning then to Ethan, she let her gaze rest on him for a long moment. Finally, she offered him a small, approving nod. "You did very well," she said, words that made Ethan's posture relax into something almost like a relieved smile. Wait until someone offers you 10,000 points, Ying said. To someone of Ethan's caliber, 10,000 points was a mere drop in the bucket, hardly enough to register. Understood, Ethan replied calmly. Ying had always admired Ethan's composure. He appreciated that Ethan knew when to speak and when to remain silent. Ethan didn't press for details, but Ying's curiosity was piqued. With a slight smile, he asked, "Aren't you wondering why I put Zhenggui there?" Chapter 66, Choice, Part 3. Wu Ying's question caught Ethan completely off guard. He'd always considered Ying the type of man who went straight for the heart of a matter, efficient, focused, with no patience for small talk. Ethan masked his surprise, forced a composed nod, and replied, "I was just curious. After all, neither a superior nor a subordinate would ever ask something like that." Ethan had long held a deep respect for Wu Ying, not because of his rank as a senior cadre in the Rockets or his position as deputy leader of the Shadow Group, but because of his sheer heavenly king-level strength. In Ethan's view, the world ran on a simple survival of the fittest principle. Only those with true power commanded respect, and Ying, without question, was a real heavenly king. For a heartbeat, Ying said nothing, his dark eyes scrutinizing Ethan. Then he threw back his head and laughed, a clear, genuine sound that echoed in the silent room. "Ha! You really are something, Ethan." Ying had alluded to this very thing again and again since they first met, something called the Yingko. Ethan had never quite understood what the term meant. But now, after seeing it in action, everything finally clicked. Ethan frowned as the third figure emerged. At first, when the second had appeared, he'd convinced himself he understood what was happening, but now he realized how wrong he'd been. His confident smile faded into a puzzled crease. After a long moment of silence, Ying spoke softly. "In a battle, you'd want to protect me from serious injury. There is a place on Trial Island where wounds heal almost instantly. You should go there, to the Spirit Grove, where the ghosts gather." He paused, eyes narrowing as if recalling a distant memory. "I first discovered that sanctuary during my own trials on the island. Back then, I was among the very first trainers recruited by Team Rocket." Ethan's breath caught. The first wave of Rocket test trainers? Shadow operatives had come from Trial Island too? Sensing his shock, Ying went on. "That's how I saw it, at least. When Trial Island was first explored, only our initial recruits survived its dangers. I was one of those survivors. There was another, someone you may encounter one day." Ying's words trailed off. He never named the other survivor, but Ethan's mind jumped to one possibility. Dark, the deputy leader of the Shadow Organization. If Ying was right, their paths were destined to cross. Ethan squared his shoulders. Now that he understood the island's hidden refuge, what Ying called the Spirit Grove, he knew where he had to go next. Whatever lay ahead, he would be ready. Wu Ying shifted the conversation away from his past. "Up north, at that phantom convergence, you've probably seen the stone pillars standing firm against the spirit currents. The waters around them run deep. You're not ready to meddle there. Consider yourself lucky that your power isn't strong enough yet. Otherwise, you might never have returned. Very few even know the place exists, so keep it to yourself. When your strength grows, you'll understand why." Ethan's eyes narrowed for a moment before he composed himself and bowed his head. Understood. He had no intention of exploring those pillars right away. After all, even someone as powerful as Wu Ying had chosen to preserve that strange site rather than destroy it. Wu Ying shook his head. Though Ethan's reply was respectful and straightforward, the master had caught that flicker of curiosity in his student's gaze. "I didn't linger on the topic." Ying's voice was low and steady. "You've passed my first test. Now you're qualified to know who I really am in the Rockets." My heart hammered. I'd suspected Ying's true position for some time, but even within the Rockets, few are cleared to learn of the Shadow's existence. I kept my silence. "Show me the medal I gave you." I drew the dark cloud insignia from my belt's hidden compartment and held it out. Ying took it, rolling it between his fingers, as though reading its every contour. "This," he said, handing it back to me, "is the Shadow Reserve Medal, our branch's most secretive symbol. The moment you received it, the real trials began. The task you helped me complete earlier was only the first step." He paused, then leaned closer. "My name is Ying. I serve as deputy leader of the Shadow Team. From now on, I'll assign you a series of missions. Succeed in them all, and you'll earn your place among us." I nodded, determination stealing my nerves. This was only the beginning. Ying leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "I can't promise what perks or burdens come with joining us, but I can guarantee one thing. Countless soldiers in the rockets dream of getting in by their own merit, some so eager they don't even realize the shadow exists." He let that hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "Right now, you still have a choice. You can finish this mission and enlist directly with us, or you can abandon it, head to Trial Island like any other recruit, start out as a rocket soldier or captain, and claw your way up the ranks." Ethan met Ying's gaze, though inside he'd already decided. Aligning himself with the shadow would fast-track his rise in the rockets, and he'd have their covert support to boot. But he kept his expression calm, careful not to betray too much. After a measured pause, he looked back up and said, "I'll stay on this mission." Ying allowed himself a faint, satisfied smile. Ethan's choice was exactly what he'd expected. No hesitation, no second-guessing. His resolve had been clear long before now. I heard Ethan's reply and couldn't hide my smile. "You'll be glad you made that choice," I said. Ethan simply nodded. Some things are difficult to put into words, and he knew in his heart that he'd done the right thing. Just then, a low humming began, first faint, then steadily growing until it filled the room. Ethan's eyes widened at the sound. From a shadowed corner, a massive sting bee emerged, its translucent wings shimmering in the light. It hovered gracefully before gliding to my side, its twin barbed stingers brushing gently against my forearm in a surprisingly affectionate gesture. "Is that?" Ethan whispered in astonishment. I chuckled. "Exactly. This little one hatched from the elven egg you brought last week." Ethan stepped forward, disbelief etched on his face. Even with a creature known for rapid growth, 7 days was nowhere near enough time for an egg to develop into something this size. He reached out, stroking the bee's smooth, triangular head as he tried to make sense of it. Sensing his confusion, I explained, "I know it seems impossible, but this sting bee has extraordinary talent. From the moment it emerged, it's trained relentlessly. Its progress has been nothing short of miraculous." Ethan let out a slow breath, his surprise giving way to respect. In that moment, it was clear. His decision had been the right one. Chapter title: Today's Newly Evolved Giant Needlebee. Author's note: Thank you for reading my very first novel. If you enjoy it, I'd be honored if you'd recommend it to others and add it to your bookmarks. Please forgive any rough spots, and thank you for your support. Hibiscus, Chapter 67, The Chance to Leave the Island. Ethan flipped open his Pokédex and brought up the profile for his newly enhanced Big Needlebee. As soon as the data appeared, his jaw dropped. Pokémon Big Needlebee, dark green. Gender male, level 11, type bug poison. Ability sniper. Held item, none. Genetic skills, insect bite, gas gathering. Basic moves, twin needles, random attack. Teachable moves, sharpen. Learnable moves, poison sting, fire blast. Ethan tapped his fingers against the table, astonished. The growth rate alone was impressive, but it was the Pokemon's qualification rank that really blew him away. A standard green stinger bee maxes out at green, yet this specimen had vaulted all the way up to dark green, just 1 tier shy of cyan. He couldn't help but think of Xing Ying, revered as the Sky King and a high-ranking rocket faction leader. With near unlimited resources at his disposal, Xing Ying had forcibly upgraded this bee's quality by an entire rank. On paper, a 1-rank boost might seem minor, but once Big Needlebee reached full maturity, that edge would translate into a leap of at least 1 entire power tier. Add to that Xing Ying's rigorous, hands-on training and the arsenal of special moves he'd injected into the bee's regimen, and Ethan realized that even a seasoned Blue Elven elite would have virtually no chance in a straight fight. He closed the Pokédex, his mind racing with possibilities. With a partner this formidable at his side, the prospect of leaving the island, even if only temporarily, suddenly felt a lot less daunting. Big Needlebees share a common insect trait, a built-in premonition system. Oddly enough, as their blood volume drops, the power of that system actually increases, a handy advantage in a fight, but their deadliest secret is the hidden sniper ability. When a Big Needlebee with sniper lands a key hit, its damage isn't merely multiplied by the usual 1.5, it jumps straight to 2.25, giving it an extra 0.75 boost. That kind of power can end a battle in a single strike, making Sniper one of the most feared traits in the entire insect roster. If Ethan had any inkling that his big needle bee possessed Sniper, he wouldn't hesitate to put it to use. The problem is that the chance of discovering a hidden ability like this is vanishingly small. So when his shadow pipeline hatched a big needle bee carrying Sniper, it was nothing short of a miracle, and also the reason Ethan poured so many resources into raising it to first-level qualification. Aya stared in shock. Ethan, however, composed himself almost immediately. Yes, his big needle bee was extraordinary, but he would make no apologies for investing in such power. Wu Ying noticed Ethan's expression shift, though the look of shock never left his eyes, and he gave a subtle nod to himself. "This trial is different," he said softly, "so don't hold back your strength anymore. Show us exactly what you can do. I can't reveal all the details, but here's one promise. Nobody's going to single you out." Ethan met his gaze warily. Suddenly, Wu Ying's aura flared like a true king of heaven, the air humming with his power. As a member of the Rockets, a secretive organization notorious for eliminating rising geniuses, Wu Ying understood Ethan's hesitation better than anyone, yet he knew that this trial had rules of its own. Ethan's brow furrowed. "This trial really is special?" he murmured, recalling nothing like it in his previous attempts. "Why didn't I sense that before?" "Look around," Wu Ying replied. "Every participant here has an exceptional resume, and the spell foci we hand out aren't low-tier toys. They're loaded with senior-grade enchantments. Do you honestly think everyone's going to be as easygoing as Guga, with a big brother watching their back?" At the mention of Guga, Ethan's pupils constricted as realization hit him. This wasn't a casual screening. It was a battlefield designed to weed out the unprepared, turning any weak contender into cannon fodder. And now that he understood the stakes, there was no turning back. Ethan frowned, disbelief creeping into his voice. Why assign a green-level elf to this trial? If the tester dies, the loss would be devastating. And why didn't you foresee the danger last time? Did you simply fail to meet the requirements? Ying met his gaze coolly. Your dark crow performed exceptionally well and carried a full load in the last test. It's not wrong to conserve your strength, but if you truly intend to rise through the rocket ranks, this trial is a golden opportunity. Except, this time is different. He let those final words hang in the air, the emphasis unmistakable. Though he offered no further explanation, Ethan felt the warning in every syllable. He straightened, eyes narrowing. If even Ying, renowned for his insight, was signaling something unusual, then this trial must be far from ordinary. Ethan wasn't naive enough to believe that a flawless performance here would automatically guarantee a promotion. True, if Ying had truly removed all constraints, excelling might accelerate his career, but it would be like dancing on a razor's edge, thrilling yet perilous if he slipped. Ying's words trailed off, but his tone had already shifted the entire plan around Ethan. Then, almost casually, he added something that made Ethan's heart jump. The little fellow lingering in your shadow is no ordinary elf. He's exceptionally talented. Your luck really is astounding. Ying's gaze flicked to the silhouette behind Ethan, studying it with undisguised interest. A cold bead of sweat trickled down Ethan's spine. Instinctively, he slid a hand to the belt where Rocket's elven orb hung, the mystic crystal that bound the beast, and braced himself to release it at a moment's notice. Without that advantage, he'd be like a fish on a cutting board. Noticing Ethan's tension, Ying broke into a calm smile and waved him off. "Don't worry. I'm not here to snatch your elf. If I wanted to take you down, do you really think I'd stand around chatting? Even if you brought out another elf, it wouldn't change a thing." There it was, the unshakable confidence of a heavenly king. Thompson clenched his jaw, refusing to let his fears show, while Ying leaned back, utterly at ease. The air between them crackled, each man sizing up the other, and Ethan realized he'd never met anyone quite like this before. Ethan could see the surprise in Wu Ying's eyes. Even though he was barely over 5 feet tall, he'd managed to make the veteran rocket operative hesitate. Wu Ying hadn't expected a small fry like him to react so quickly, especially not with such polished trainer skills. But the truth was just as clear. At Ethan's current strength level, none of Wu Ying's 3 Pokémon, Beedrill, Honchcrow, and that notorious Gengar, stood a chance in a real fight. Ethan loosened his belt with a wry smile. He knew he'd almost let his guard slip, and he silently chastised himself for the rookie error. Still, Wu Ying's momentary recoil had less to do with doubt about Ethan's ability than it did with the respect his composure demanded. As Ethan straightened up, Wu Ying waved his hand, signaling Beedrill to advance. Leaning forward on the table, he watched intently. "In short," Wu Ying began, voice steady, "you've performed exceptionally well in this trial. Continue on this path, and I'll grant you permission to leave Trial Island early. There's simply no one left here who can challenge you." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. An early exit from Trial Island would be a huge advantage, one he hadn't dared to hope for so soon. Revised chapter, Lord Yinkai's expression remained inscrutable as Ethan hesitated under his steady gaze. Ethan fought the urge to flee but found himself rooted to the spot. Finally, he drew in a slow breath, bowed his head slightly, and nodded. "Yes, Lord Yinkai." At Ethan's assent, Yinkai allowed himself the faintest of smiles. He leaned forward, studied Ethan for a long moment, then reclined gracefully in his chair. "Very good," he said softly, "as long as I am satisfied. Author's note, thank you so much for our support. I'm writing on my phone right now, so I apologize for any typos. I'll be back tonight to thank each of you personally for your likes, bookmarks, and recommendations. Your encouragement means the world to me." Chapter 68, Skill Planning, Part 2. When Ethan stepped out of the dim study, his shirt clung to his back, soaked with sweat. Ling's casual guess that he could discern an elf's innate aptitude still rattled him. Thankfully, Ling merely assumed his startled reaction sprang from fear that Ethan might snatch the elf away, not from the fact that Ethan really could read magical creatures' talents. If anyone ever discovered the truth, they'd think it impossible. From now on, he'd have to be much more discreet whenever he probed an elf's aptitude. He slapped his cheeks, exhaled sharply, and forced his thoughts back on track. Switching focus wasn't easy. Push one worry aside, and another rushed in to fill the void. At least he could tackle something concrete, upgrading his familiars. The Dark Crow's current abilities handled his daily skirmishes well enough, but both the Dull Beast and the Phantom Ghost still had empty skill slots waiting for unlocks from their skill CDs. With 10,000 points freshly credited from today's mission, Ethan intended to spend every last one this very moment. First priority, 2 crowd control skills. He opened the skill redemption menu, located the ensnaring bind entries, each priced at 5,000 points, and paused only briefly before confirming. In a heartbeat, his points dropped to 0, and both the Dull Beast and the Phantom Ghost had learned the new binding ability. Ethan exhaled in relief. With his hidden gift still under wraps, and his familiars now armed with crucial control skills, he felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. His pouch buzzed again, tugging his attention back to the flickering mission interface. Ethan didn't mind spending those points at all. As his closest protector, Geesey the Ghost not only bolstered his resistance against enemy abilities, but also served as a reliable shield whenever things got dangerous. Equally important were the binding techniques taught by the Drowsy Beast. In the heat of battle, or as a last-ditch move before blinking away, those skills could absorb an otherwise lethal blow. With those 2 defensive pillars in place, Ethan moved on to the offense. He ran a mental simulation of a duel between Geesey and the Drowsy Beast to refine his strategy. At its core, Geesey's fighting style relied on a deadly combination of hypnosis, sleep, dream speech, and poison. Fortunately, Ethan had already mastered sleep. All that remained was to unlock dream speech and poison to complete the ghost's arsenal. But there was a catch. He simply didn't have enough skill points to acquire both of those coveted abilities at once. As much as he wanted to round out Geesey's repertoire immediately, he'd have to choose carefully and wait to save up the rest. Ethan studied the 2 skill offerings, Dream Talk and Poisonous, with a careful eye. Since his ghost-type poison affinity was still raw, a poisonous skill wouldn't yield much benefit right away. His real plan was to first refine the ghost poison attributes themselves, then later fuse them with advanced toxin-based techniques to command toxic energy more effectively. Redeeming that poisonous skill would cost him 7,000 Geese points, The game currency uses to trade and expend resources, but Ethan, nicknamed the Foolish Beast, was more than ready to invest. By nature, Ethan was a beast elf attuned to both the water system and the superpower system, granting him a suite of elven attributes that conferred elemental resistances. He enjoyed double resistance against insect-type attacks and single resistance to ghost, grass, electric, and dark types, 5 resistances in all. Yet that defensive breadth carried its own drawback. A wide attack surface meant many potential weaknesses. If he could secure the right complementary attributes, though, he'd shore up those gaps and neutralize the vulnerabilities that still threatened him. Ethan replayed the numbers in his head as he stepped away from the hidden door. The attributes you gain from the attribute draw and awakening power skills depend entirely on the elf you pick. It's effectively a plus face-reading talent. Even though awakening power is fairly common, demand has driven its exchange cost up to 7,000 points. He'd started with 14,000 points, spent 7,000 on his first skill, then tipped Sky and Fox for their help, leaving him with 6,200. Completing today's task had just earned him another 10,000 points, for a grand total of 6,200. But the 4 skills he wanted, 2 possession skills, 1 dream talk, and awakening power, would set him back 24,000 points. He simply didn't have enough. No matter, he could trade in lesser abilities to make up the difference. Already, he'd crunched the numbers again on the walk over to the exchange counter. Stepping up to the attendant, Ethan withdrew his point card and laid it on the marble countertop. This shows 6,200 points, plus the 10,000-point reward from today's mission. The total's 16,200. The clerk took the card, tapped a few commands into the terminal, and looked up with a nod. Confirmed. 16,200 points available. What would you like to do next? Ying was ready to award Ethan 10,000 points, but Ethan had other plans. Fresh from completing the shadow mission, he'd already begun speculating about what might come next. Still, as a newcomer, there were limits to what he could know. For now, his only goal was to fulfill his assignments safely and without question. Before stepping away, Ethan paused at his belt and drew out a palm-sized black stone, the primary dark stone he'd been carrying. He'd thought it through. Although mid- or high-grade dark stones were virtually priceless, redeeming them at the rocket's official rate felt wasteful. Primary dark stones were far more common, easily purchasable if you had the credits, and made a more practical trade. Pulling out the rocket's redemption guide, he confirmed the numbers. A primary dark stone was listed at 50,000 points, but the organization applied a 30% discount on exchanges. In the end, Ethan would receive 35,000 points for the stone, a fair return, far better than letting it gather dust. With that settled, he handed over the stone and watched his point total rise, ready to move on to whatever came next. Ethan watched as the rocket exchange system quietly ran its calculations. Judging by how many points Team Rocket pulled in through this system each year, it was no wonder they'd expanded so rapidly. "Convert this dark stone into points," he said, holding it out. Rao blinked at the gem in Ethan's hand. He'd grown so used to witnessing Ethan's incredible luck that few other trainers even got a look in. Most of them, even the well-connected ones, like Guga with his brother's backing, struggled to earn more than 10,000 points in a year. Ethan alone had already racked up 20,000 points last year, followed by another 10,000 for completing the shadow mission. Now this dark stone would fetch a further 35,000 points. That brought Ethan's current total to a staggering 65,000. Suppressing his surprise, Rao forced a polite smile and took the dark stone. Primary dark stone, 35,000 points, just as the system indicates. "Perfect," Ethan replied calmly, imagining the next item he'd claim. He couldn't shake the fear that Ethan might suddenly produce a high-level dark stone, and in an instant, drain every stored resource on Trial Island. If you enjoyed this chapter, please bookmark and support the story. La 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 la. Chapter 69, Awakening Power, Part 3. Ethan knew the exchange rates by heart. 2 defensive skill CDs, 1 Dream Talk skill CD, and an Awakening Power CD. Actually, scratch that. Make it 3 Awakening Power CDs. If he had the points, why not go for all 3? Even if the awakened attributes turned out useless, there was always the chance they'd perfectly offset his weak strike stats. Luck and fate would decide. The clerk behind the counter glanced at his screen and couldn't hide a faint smile. She'd seen plenty of high rollers, but Ethan's willingness to burn through his points so casually still managed to surprise her. "All right," she said, tapping her tablet. "Here's your ID card, 13,200 points left, and these are the skill CDs you've redeemed." She lifted each CD from the locked shelf and placed them neatly on the counter. 3 awakening power discs, ready for activation. Ethan took them without a word. With a quick swipe, she deducted the points, then returned her attention to the next customer in line, leaving Ethan to slip the CDs into his pack. From the clerk's perspective, it was astonishing. She'd been in charge of this rewards desk for 2 years. A civilian staff member, yes, but still part of the Rockets. And in all that time, she'd never come close to racking up as many points as Ethan had today. Ethan didn't care what anyone thought. He'd made his choice. Now, all that remained was to see what kind of power would awaken, and whether it would finally tip the scales in his favor. Ethan gave the odd-looking staff member a casual nod, slipped the new skill disc into his storage belt, and summoned his dark crow before heading toward the special training facility. He knew he could have tapped into the on-site skill trainers, but he wasn't about to reveal every card in his hand. Inside, the training area was divided into reinforced cubicles rather than open halls. Each room was outfitted with racks of training tools and a few dummies, but the place clearly saw little use. Most rooms sat empty. Brushing off the curious glances of the attendants, Ethan spent 100 points and booked the largest chamber. Once the heavy door was unlocked, he turned to his spectral companion. "Spectre, sweep the room for any surveillance." From Ethan's shadow, a pale wisp slipped free and scuttled along the walls and ceiling, probing every nook and cranny. In under a minute, it floated back. "0 surveillance devices detected," it reported. Satisfied, Ethan extended his hand and released his next summon, the so-called dumb beast, from the elven containment orb. The creature, unaccustomed to freedom after its long confinement, lumbered out with a series of yawns. It rubbed its muzzle against the floorboards in lazy circles, decidedly off-key behavior for a pet normally brimming with restless energy. Yet for now, Ethan was simply relieved to have the training room entirely to himself. Ethan sighed and ruffled the round head of the lumbering creature before him. "You two goofballs, or we'll never finish today's session." The beast grunted in response, accustomed by now to Ethan's exasperated tone, and gave a few playful hops. Overhead, the glossy black crow dove down in greeting, its sharp caws echoing across the clearing. For a precious moment, the 3 of them basked in this rare respite from their relentless drills. Ethan held up a hand. "Okay, that's enough fun. Let's get back to work." He withdrew a glowing skill disc from his pack, an orb inscribed with shifting runes, and flipped it thoughtfully between his fingers. In the center of the field, he activated the elven conduit. A translucent globe formed at his command, its surface rippling with soft light. One by one, Ethan guided each elf into the sphere's containment field and slotted the globe into the skill transfer matrix. Energy tendrils snaked out, imprinting the disc's spells onto their eager minds. "These discs guarantee you learn the basics," Ethan explained, watching the runic glow pulse, "but only hours of drilling and real combat will turn these from neat tricks into reliable tools." He reviewed the disc's catalog of spells, giving only a cursory nod to holding and dreamweaving, ancient arts that grant instant use but no mechanical upgrades. True refinement comes only through battlefield experience. Containment, the classic binding skill, was ready the moment you learned it. Dreamweaving, by contrast, demanded endless practice to master its subtle illusions. Finally, Ethan reserved 1 slot for Sun Menghua, hand-selected to inherit the rare Gui Si technique, spirit binding at its most potent. With the last imprint complete, he withdrew the disc and surveyed his charges. The beast let out an eager growl. The crow stretched its wings, restless. Ethan allowed himself a half-smile. "All right," he said firmly. "Tomorrow morning, full simulation drills. Rest up, because there's no more playing around." And with that, the clearing fell silent, the calm before the storm of training that lay ahead. Ethan stepped into the training chamber, every sense alert. In the battles to come, his team's mastery of awakening powers would be critical, and he was determined to understand exactly what each ability would look like in action. Today's volunteer was Dark Crow, the first elf recruit to join Ethan's squad and a paragon of self-discipline. Dark Crow closed his eyes and activated the Awakening Elf skill protocol that had been embedded in his mind. Having only just learned the sequence, he moved deliberately, each motion taking precious seconds. After 3 long minutes, he inhaled deeply and then let the power surge. A network of faint currents flickered beneath Dark Crow's skin, converging like magnetic fields around an unseen core. Ethan watched from the observation window as the swirling energies condensed into a small, glowing orb in Dark Crow's palms. The sphere radiated a soft yellow light that pulsed with every beat of his heart. As more electrical energy funneled in, the orb's surface solidified, its color shifting from warm gold to an ice-blue shimmer. Tiny arcs of light roamed across its skin, crackling with barely contained force. Dark Crow's brows furrowed. He was straining to maintain control. The currents raced faster, threatening to break free. For a heartbeat, the orb blazed with unrestrained power, then Dark Crow's concentration snapped. He staggered backward, breath coming in ragged gasps as the energy dissolved harmlessly into the air. Ethan exhaled. That flash of blue electricity had revealed the true nature of Dark Crow's awakening power, an electrical attribute of extraordinary intensity. More trials lay ahead, but at least now he had a starting point. The next elf's test, Ethan knew, would only bring him closer to understanding the full spectrum of their hidden strengths. Ethan took a steady breath and launched a glowing yellow orb of energy at the target in the center of the chamber. The moment it struck the bullseye, the sphere detonated in a ring of flame with a thunderous boom. Brilliant tendrils of yellow and blue light radiated outward, fizzing into nothingness as they reached the blast's edge. This demonstration encapsulated the essence of an awakening power attack. Condense your awakened energy into a single projectile, then hurl it at your enemy to deal direct impact damage, and, if it lands perfectly, inflict additional harm within the explosion's radius. Ethan couldn't help but appreciate the trainer's foresight in designing this room. Aside from a solitary scorch mark on the floor, the blast left no lasting damage, and although the explosion had been deafening, not a single staff member came rushing in. The chamber's soundproofing was clearly top-notch. He smiled to himself. Having a space like this for training was nothing short of indispensable. Ethan studied Dark Crow's newly awakened power. Judging by its color and visual effects, it clearly tapped into electric-type energy. It resembled an electro ball in shape, though its charge wasn't quite as intense. Unlike Electro Ball, which grows more powerful with greater speed differences, this attack's strength seemed fixed, but at first glance, the two moves looked almost identical. Tagging Dark Crow's awakening as electric made perfect sense to Ethan. It didn't erase all of Dark Crow's shortcomings, but it did broaden its offensive coverage. Most importantly, this new electric element would help against water-type foes, one of Dark Crow's greatest challenges. In a flooded arena or a lake battle, Dark Crow's staple dark flying move, Dark Raven, often struggled to finish off water opponents. Now, with electric attacks in its repertoire, Dark Crow could finally plug that weakness and become a far more formidable combatant. Furthermore, in battles against the winged elves, this awakened ability allows Dark Crow to subdue his foes with greater ease, solidifying his air superiority and making the skies his undisputed domain. Ethan smiled and reached out to stroke the sleek black feathers of his loyal companion, a well-earned reward for today's victory. Chapter 70. Dream Talk, 13. After testing the Dark Raven's awakening power, Ethan turned his attention to the team's second member. Like the Dark Raven, the clumsy beast needed about 3 minutes before it could successfully unleash its own awakening power. But when it did, the difference was striking. Instead of crackling yellow lightning, the beast summoned a glowing red orb that radiated intense heat. Ethan recognized it immediately. This was a fire-type awakening power. In contrast to the Dark Raven's electric attacks, the fiery energy not only diversified the clumsy beast's offensive options, but also compensated for its slow, unwieldy nature. In fact, the fire attribute seemed tailor-made for this creature, at least for now. That suitability became even clearer when Ethan ran through the beast's type matchups in his head. As a water psychic type, it was doubly vulnerable to bug, ghost, grass, electric, and dark attacks. By adding fire to its arsenal, the clumsy beast could cover many of those weaknesses and become a far more versatile fighter. Ethan's awakening had shifted the balance when it came to bug and grass-type spirits. Though he still couldn't entirely nullify their advantages, he now possessed a reliable countermeasure. No longer would he be beaten back at every turn. His new power also exerted a check on steel and ice-type spirits, so when facing those lines, Ethan wouldn't be left helpless. In effect, his awakening expanded the team's offensive reach across 4 different types. Looking ahead to future battles, Ethan decided he would never send his dumb beasts against electric or dark-type spirits unless it was a last resort. Those matchups were too unfavorable, the elemental disadvantage far too great. As for a ghost-type awakening, it hadn't crossed his mind. His focus remained firmly on the grass system. Although awakening properties operate independently of a spirit's innate type, everyone was still astonished by how potent grass proved to be. Out of the 18 elemental lines, grass carried the most far-reaching restraints. Ethan stood at the edge of the expansive training arena, watching his 3 awakened elves, Dark Crow, the Somnolent Beast, and Phantom Wraith, prepare for their final drills. Holographic charts flickered overhead, projecting elemental affinities and counters in a spinning wheel of light. "All right, team," he called out, "let's run through this one more time. Remember, grass attributes can be countered by 5 distinct elements, but grass itself suppresses more affinities than any other element. That's why unlocking grass for you two," he nodded at Somnolent Beast and Phantom Wraith, "was so critical." Phantom Wraith's translucent form shimmered as he flexed his spectral claws. "When I pair hypnosis with my new grass techniques," he said, "my time warp strikes now cover twice the area. Even earth spirits, who used to pin me down, stand no chance." Ethan smiled. "Exactly. You were neutralized twice by ground system skills before, but your grass awakening has completely turned the tables. And Somnolent Beast, your sluggishness is gone. Your lethargy attacks now carry the cutting edge of grass energy." The Somnolent Beast lifted a heavy paw, sprouts of emerald energy snaking along its fur. "I feel alive," it rumbled. Ethan turned to Dark Crow, whose ebony wings rustled in the artificial breeze. "You haven't changed, but that's fine. Your innate affinity isn't hampered by grass restrictions. Between the 3 of you, our elemental coverage is virtually seamless." He tapped the hologram, and 5 segments lit up around the grass icon, each representing an element that counters grass. Then, around those 5 segments, dozens more indicators glowed, showing every affinity grass can subdue. "See this? Outside forces can neutralize grass in 5 ways, but grass itself can suppress countless others. By diversifying your awakenings, we've closed almost every gap." Ethan's gaze swept the team. "And for any elves not bound by grass constraints, I'll tailor specialized battle plan NS to leverage your freedom. Now that we've completed the awakening assessment, let's make the most of this rented arena. It's a safe environment, perfect for pushing your limits. Don't hold back." A determined hush fell over the group. Then in unison, they took their stances, ready to unleash their full potential. Ethan allowed himself a satisfied nod. The real battles lay ahead, but here, in this crucible of practice, they were forging an unbeatable force. Ethan spent the next few days laying out a comprehensive training program for his new elven allies. He began by grouping the Dark Crows and the Beastkin together, tasking them with refining the very powers they'd only just awakened. Every session was personally overseen by Ethan, who guided each squad through drills tailored to their unique abilities. Among all the recruits, one elf in particular caught his attention: Geis. Since Geis had only recently surrendered and joined their ranks, Ethan first put him through a series of endurance tests, long runs, obstacle courses, and sparring matches against lower-level elves to gauge his raw strength and stamina. Geis held his own, but Ethan knew there was something more to unlock. What Geis needed wasn't just brute force or basic awakening drills. It was control over his rare new talent, Dream Talk. This skill, acquired from a mysterious skill CD, let its user execute any known ability while asleep. Legend told of a dream phantom, a spectral warrior from Ethan's past life, who could precisely choose which move to unleash mid-slumber. If a phantom could do it, Ethan was convinced Geese could too. So Ethan shifted Geese's training completely. Rather than drilling awakened powers in the waking world, Geese's next challenge would be to practice dream talk until he could consciously select and activate a specific skill in his dreams. It wouldn't be easy. Learning to command magic under unconscious conditions raised the bar higher than any sparring match, but Ethan was determined. If Geese mastered this, he'd become a formidable asset both on and off the battlefield. And that, Ethan knew, could turn the tide of many battles to come. At the start, Ethan's requirements had been minimal. No particular skill was mandated. Now, however, he insisted that each ghost operate strictly within a prescribed set of abilities, ruling out any random talents. When the exercise began, the shambling beast and the shadow crow sprang into action, channeling their awakened powers against the dummy target, while nimbly sidestepping whatever chaotic effects the slumbering ghosts might unleash. In those first trials, Geese's dream whisper was completely erratic. Skills would flare up without warning or pattern. But once Ethan fine-tuned Geese's mental state and calibrated the conditions under which Dream Whisper could be activated, Geese learned to draw from just 5 skills at will. That represented a major breakthrough and validated Ethan's theory. Even the notoriously uncontrollable Dream Whisper can be harnessed with the right method. If this technique could be perfected, it would boost combat strength by several tiers, not only for standard ghosts but for the elite gang ghosts to come. Still, achieving full mastery over Dream Whisper's effects remains a formidable challenge. Ethan had been wrestling with a single question ever since the team discovered the power of dream words. How exactly do you control them while you're asleep? At first glance, the answer seemed obvious. If you could induce a specific dream scene, it would guide the sleeper's subconscious to produce the right words. But the first test, conducted by Geese, proved otherwise. Geese fell asleep under the lab's pale lamps, a small projector whirring gently behind him. The technicians had arranged a forest glade scene, complete with dappled sunlight and whispering leaves. Everything was in place to coax the perfect dream. And yet, when Geese woke, no coherent dream words had formed, nothing that the elves could use to awaken a single skill. Shaking his head, Geese concluded, "It isn't about staging a dream scene. In such a short session, you can't force the mind to produce any effective words. If the dream wasn't the trigger, perhaps the commander's voice or any external command could shape the words instead." For the second attempt, Ethan joined Geese under the sleep dome. Minutes before lights out, Ethan recited a soft, rhythmic chant, a set of instructions meant to steer the dream words toward a single, focused goal. Then they both drifted off. That night, the system did pick up dream words. The elves practicing in the simulators could reproduce them accurately. But the technique still failed its test. While the words were clear, there was no way to dictate which ability would awaken. One morning, the lab was littered with fragments of half-awakened talents. Earth magic flickered briefly, then fizzled. Shadow stepping stuttered in and out of existence. Control had been lost. The second trial, like the first, had ended in disappointment. Still, they learned something important. External cues could influence dream words, but they couldn't anchor the outcome. Ethan proposed one last hypothesis. What if the key lay entirely within the sleeper's own mind? What if, before drifting off, you reviewed not a dream scene or a command, but the exact list of skills you wanted to awaken? Concentrating on a mental checklist at the edge of sleep is no easy task. Thoughts whirl in at odd angles, memories, worries, even the sound of your own breathing. But it was the only lead they hadn't fully explored. For the third and final experiment, Haggis volunteered. Lying on the sleep cot, he took a deep breath and closed his eyes. In his mind, he ran through the awakening skills one by one. Ember Strike, Frost Ward, Gale Dash. He repeated them over and over until the last sliver of wakefulness slipped away. When Haggis awoke, the readings were unmistakable. Not only had dream words formed, they came in numbers far higher than any previous test. The elves practicing that morning reported a surge in new awakenings, techniques they'd never managed to produce before. A simple mental review, it seemed, had unlocked the door. Ethan and the rest of the team gathered around the console, watching streams of data tick upward. This third approach, focusing the conscious mind on the very skills you intend to awaken, was clearly far more effective than any artificial dream scene or external command. It didn't guarantee absolute control over every outcome, but it represented a watershed moment in their research. As dawn broke, Ethan allowed himself a rare smile. They were finally beginning to understand how to shape the elusive power of dream words. From the inside out, Ethan's heart lifted at the confirmation of his theory. It was daunting, of course, but at least now he had a viable path forward. Then another idea struck him. What if he used electrocardiogram feedback to sharpen a subject's mental focus while invoking the dream words? It was an intriguing avenue worth investigating. Author's note: Hibiscus has been swamped with work lately, so this chapter might not be my best. Thank you all for your understanding. Chapter 71, 4 Factions, 2 or 3. Ethan reappeared in the central plaza of the base, accompanied only by a sleek black crow perched on his shoulder. His other companion, a curious little creature, had already vanished back into the elven orb, and Guizy slipped quietly into Ethan's shadow. With the third test about to begin, contestants steadily crowded the square. Dominating the center, the colossal trial stone still stood upon its raised platform. Beside it, a makeshift battlefield had been carved out, earth stripped of weeds, leveled, and marked with lines in the dirt. This, no doubt, would be the arena where defeated challengers would have to fight for redemption. Small groups began to form, pairs of duelists, trios of novice mages, scant bands of warriors. Ethan took his place in the west corner, eyes scanning the gathering throng. Moments later, Sky arrived with his cadre in tow. Spotting Ethan, he quickened his pace and guided his followers into formation behind their mentor. "Master Ethan!" they called in a unified salute. Their respectful greeting clinched them as one of the few organized factions in the square, an island of order amid the growing clamor of hopeful competitors. Ethan gave a slight nod to his teammates, closed his eyes, and drew in a steadying breath. The training square was laid out into 4 clear sectors today. At the western marker stood Ethan's squad, just over 20 of them, huddled together in a tight formation. Directly across, at the eastern point, was Guga's group, the largest contingent with nearly 40 trainees, their distance betraying confidence. To the north, Jasmine's unit numbered about 24, mostly female cadets, with a handful of younger recruits. They shifted uneasily under the sharp glares of the senior girls. In the southern sector, nearly 30 soloists had formed a loose alliance, teams of 1 or 2 who'd banded together at the last minute. Every faction held its ground in silence, unwilling to reveal tactics or forge early alliances. A crackle over the comms cut through the tension, and Serpent's voice boomed across the square. "No briefing film today. We move straight to the test." The attack value assessment, simple, direct, unforgiving, was up next. Everyone snapped to attention, knowing this trial would lay bare who was ready to fight and who would break under pressure. To prevent a repeat of last time's chaos, the Rockets instituted a straightforward number sequence trial. Each contestant had to recite a designated string of numbers in turn, 300 in all, though many slots were already vacant from those long since eliminated. The process was swift and unforgiving. A single hesitation or miscount meant immediate disqualification, while perfect recitation secured one's place in the ranks. At Ethan's feet stood the Dark Crow, utterly indifferent to the envious whispers and fearful glances swirling around them. He preened his glossy feathers, boredom etched into every movement. To him, this trial was a tedious farce. Striking a dead stone could only showcase brute force, not the nuanced skill of a seasoned warrior. His sharp eyes roved over the field of challengers, the soulless viper with its cold, unblinking gaze directly opposite him, the rotund supersonic bat looming to the north, and the long-maned dog warden fidgeting to the south. If it weren't for the relentless pressure from the stands, the Dark Crow would have flatly refused to participate in such a pointless display. After all, precious time could be better spent honing real combat skills. Still, the expectations of the crowd weighed on him, so he remained, crouched and watchful, ready for whatever came next. Chapter X Ethan, who knew the Dark Crow better than anyone, couldn't hide his grin. "Rip them apart again," he suggested, his tone light. Once we're done with this test, we can finally skip these tedious drills. And who knows, you might get a few real fights in today. He shot a pointed look at Guga, who stood opposite him, and at the abersnake coiled by Guga's side. Guga met En's gaze with a glint in his eye. His lips curved into a half smile, then he gave a soft snort and turned his head away, as if already bored. At Ethan's words, Dark Crow, Ethan's bonded spirit, stirred instantly. The ravenous black form flared its wings, its beady eyes locked on the abersnake, the creature that fascinated it above all others. For a heartbeat, it lifted off the ground as if to swoop in for the kill. Then, with a reluctant flap, it folded its wings again, reminded that this was still a formal examination. Ethan chuckled. He was used to Dark Crow's aggressive streak, but today's trial promised something different, an opportunity for genuine combat, the kind that would finally sate the spirit's hunger for battle. It wasn't only Guga watching him from the sidelines. Jasmine, the supersonic bat handler of the North, and Alec, the South's most powerful soloist, both stole furtive glances in his direction from time to time. Their eyes were alight with a cocktail of emotions, excitement, envy, longing, and that inexhaustible thirst for combat. A faint smile curved Ethan's lips. A playful gleam sparkled in his eyes. "This trial just got a lot more interesting," he murmured to himself, and whoever's nicknamed the Snake did well to tweak the rules. In Ethan's mind, the new stipulation was already taking shape. To earn a temporary leave from Trial Island, a contender must utterly dominate everyone on the field, not merely by outscoring them in raw attack value, but by crushing them in actual combat. There could be no close calls, no narrow victories. He was almost certain that Ying, the solo champion renowned for going it alone, had a hand in rewriting these guidelines. Ying hadn't appeared in the plaza today, but Ethan's instincts told him that hidden experts were scrutinizing every move. If he wanted to satisfy the island's escape conditions, he would have to show an absolute, unquestionable advantage here and now. Maybe it's because this trial is unlike any other. As the film explained, trainers aren't required to mask their talents this time. Every skill you've honed will be exposed and judged. That's the only way to truly gauge one's strength. On a battlefield where life and death hang in the balance, facing opponents of equal power, there's no advantage in holding back. If you die while hiding your strength, what did you gain? Word of this unique format spread quickly. Trainers with keen instincts, and even those who guard shadowy pasts, realized that, above all others, Ethan was the one to watch. Confident in their own abilities, they've set their sights squarely on him as their first opponent. This outcome delights Dark Crow, who craves a fierce fight, and it perfectly suits Ying's desire to probe Ethan's limits. As for Ethan himself, he welcomes the challenge. A decisive victory here will amplify his influence among the trainees. Everyone will soon know better than to underestimate him. Ethan's lips curved into a confident smile. This is going to be fun. Acknowledgements. Thank you all for your support, and special thanks to the Book City community for the rewards. Chapter 72, Terror Strength, Part 3. The whole process went off without a hitch this time. Under the watchful eye of the examiner, we each stepped up to the trial stone and tested our attack values in turn. I've already been through 2 rounds of this, so the testers know exactly how high we can push our numbers and how much we're willing to risk. When the results came in, it was clear that everyone had made overall gains. True, the jump wasn't as dramatic as after the second test, but we're all fighting for our lives here. Even a modest improvement can mean the difference between survival and, well, you know the stakes. Especially those of us who hovered near the bottom rankings. This week's brutal training was designed to drag us out of last place, because whoever finishes last doesn't just lose a chance at glory, they lose everything. Number 46, attack value 198. Next. Number 54, attack value 178. Next. Number 58, attack value. One by one, the examiner called out our numbers and values. Some faces broke into triumphant smiles at their scores. Others went pale, worry etching deep lines across their foreheads. Even so, there was no time to collapse into despair. Not yet. With the next challenge looming, there was still a chance, one last desperate fight to claw our way up and avoid oblivion. Every trial is like a sweeping wave of sand, exposing hidden nuggets of talent. If you're capable, nothing can bury you. Abba snake, strike, Guga barked. Thud. Number 99, attack value 337. A chorus of gasps rose from the crowd. This was the first time anyone had ever broken the 300-point barrier. Guga couldn't hide his pride as he lifted Abba Snake off the testing platform. Since Ethan's team had edged him out last week, Guga had redoubled his efforts, pushing his elves through grueling drills and nursing Abba Snake's wounded pride after its crushing defeat by Dark Crow. He'd even applied the secret breeding technique his brother had shared. The results spoke for themselves. Back in her corner, Abba Snake coiled contentedly, surrounded by her fellow beasts. They eyed Ethan warily, then shifted away, respect mingling with caution. Guga's triumphant grin said it all, but Ethan remained calm. Today's test scores were impressive, but they were only the beginning. True victory would come down to strategy and endurance in real combat, not just raw numbers on a screen. And that was the challenge Ethan most looked forward to. Ethan couldn't help but admit that, with the limited resources at his disposal, Guga had trained his Abyss Serpent to near perfection. If it weren't for Ethan's that is, his second, chance at life, he was convinced Guga would once again have crushed the competition outright. The arena crackled with excitement in the wake of Guga's performance, and everyone still waiting their turn seemed to feed off that energy. Number 134, attack value 308, the announcer called. This was the next contender to break the 300 mark after Guga. Standing beside her was a massive supersonic bat, the very Pokémon that had placed third in the previous trial. Its trainer, Jasmine, was as enigmatic as she was talented. Ethan realized he'd never really taken note of her before. Even after joining Team Rocket, their paths had never crossed. For a young girl to survive the brutal conditions of Trial Island, maintain a top 3 ranking, and even rally a group to challenge Guga was nothing short of extraordinary. Ethan quietly wondered what secrets lay behind her calm, confident gaze. Before the applause could die down, the announcer continued, Number 156, attack value 330. Alec, known as the strongest of the Lone Walkers, stepped into the spotlight. He was the first trainer ever to evolve an Elfmon into its next form, an achievement that had set the rumor mill churning for weeks. As Ethan watched Alec and his newly evolved partner, he felt the familiar thrill of competition rising in his chest. The trials were only just beginning, and every new challenger raised the bar a little higher. Ethan's original coyote had long since evolved into a formidable wolf dog. Riding that advantage, Jasmine rocketed up the rankings to become one of the strongest challengers, second only to Guga. But ever since Ying Ying warned that this trial would be different, Ethan found himself spotting one surprise after another. First, there were the elite monsters they'd been assigned, creatures so powerful they could easily outmatch even the Rocket Squadron captains. Yet these beasts had inexplicably been handed over to rookies like themselves. Take Jaguar's Abercrombie snake, or Jasmine's massive supersonic bat. Both were bona fide top-tier fighters. Alec's own wolf dog rivaled them in strength. And as if that weren't odd enough, a rare Fengyuan area monster, well outside its usual habitat, had shown up among the Guandu region lineup. Something about it all felt wrong. In his previous life, Ethan never paused to question the system. Surviving was hard enough. But now, reborn with clearer eyes, every irregularity sent a chill through him. He'd spent hours scouring rulebooks and comparing rosters, hunting for an explanation. None made sense. No, 234. Prepare for your trial. The examiner's voice snapped Ethan out of his thoughts. Finally, his turn had come. Heart-hammering, he strode onto the stage under the scrutiny of dozens of expectant faces. Taking a deep breath, he sent out his partner, Darkwing, the midnight black raven Pokémon, whose keen eyes had already spotted every oddity Ethan had missed. Now it was time to face the unknown. Those who'd faced Ethan and lost no longer dared to mock him. Add to that his swift, decisive handling of the Soros crisis, his bold conquest of Sky, and even the timely distribution of gas bombs, and every operation he carried out was flawless. In their eyes, he'd become the embodiment of ruthless skill and masterful strategy. Jasmine and Alec, who'd been staring blankly from the front row, finally raised their gazes to the stage. This lone civilian had outshone them all, leaving an indelible mark on their memories. Dark Crow, Wind's Blessing, Swift Wings, strike, Ethan called, voice calm and unwavering. At his command, the dark crow launched from his outstretched hand, spiraling skyward as invisible currents lifted its wings. At the very height of its ascent, it flipped and dove in a lethal arc, its whistling descent reverberating through the square. The crowd watched in awe. They'd heard tales of Ethan's prowess with the dark crow, but never had they seen him unleash its full power so openly. The ferocity of that unrestrained assault stood in stark contrast to the restrained exhibitions they'd witnessed before, leaving Jasmine and Alec wide-eyed and speechless. Ethan didn't keep the crowd waiting long. Like a storm-swept raven, he dove from the sky, his wings aglow with the condensed energy of the flight system. With a dazzling white flash, he struck the trial stone. The impact rang out with muted thunder, and even the packed earth beneath seemed to quake. Though the stone was renowned for its toughness, impervious even to rockets' most advanced tech, the sheer force of Ethan's blow made every spectator hold their breath, convinced it would shatter. When the dust settled, a stunned hush fell over the square, all eyes fixed on the stark white numerals that now hovered on the black stone. Attack value 458. A collective gasp swept through the onlookers. Sure, they'd expected Ethan to claim first place again, but a 458? He didn't merely edge out Guga in second, he outscored him by a staggering 121 points. To put that in perspective, some rookies never managed to earn 121 attack points in their entire career. Yet here was Ethan, redefining what everyone thought possible. Ethan's performance today was nothing short of spectacular. He utterly dominated every challenge, leaving everyone around him in a state of sheer terror. Later, Hibiscus opened her reading app and discovered a notification. A fellow book lover had just sent her a digital red envelope. "Thank you so much for your support," she exclaimed. Chapter 73. Guga's Challenge to Ethan, Wed. This stinky brat. Serpent, perched high in the stands, stared at the trial stone in astonishment, then couldn't help but laugh. "I swear, I've never seen someone give it their all like this." He leaned forward, squinting to verify the massive white numbers engraved in the rock. Once he was certain they were real, a slow, satisfied chuckle escaped him. As the rocket's chief instructor, stationed on Trial Island year-round, Serpent knew Ethan's record better than anyone. And honestly, today's result blew every previous tester's achievement out of the water. A sudden cough broke his amusement. The official on stage jolted upright, blinking in surprise. At Serpent's prompt, the examiner cleared his throat and called out to the waiting crowd. "Attention, please. Examinee number 234, Ethan. Attack value 458. A collective gasp rippled through the square. Every spectator froze, eyes locked on the trial stone. 458? Impossible. I've never heard of a score that high. Their amazement spilled over into whispers, murmurs, and outright exclamations. No words could fully capture the shock that gripped everyone in that instant. Ethan claimed first place in today's trial with an utterly crushing lead, leaving every other competitor in his wake. Beneath the stands, Jasmine's jaw went slack. Her perfect cheeks paled as she stared at the greenwood platform and the dark feathered crow that marked his position. After a long moment, her newly awakened wings fluttered anxiously before she bowed her head and whispered to herself, "Is this really his true power, the variable the elders keep talking about?" Standing beside her, Gujia parted her lips as if to protest, then settled for a breathless murmur. "Last time he barely edged me out, but now he's light years ahead. What kind of monster is he?" "In just 1 week," Alec remarked from the crowd with surprising calm, "he's jumped from an attack stat of 200 to over 400. He's an absolute enigma. Trials are getting more thrilling by the minute." Though his tone was steady, his grip on the railing tightened as he laid a hand on the trembling paw of the wolf dog standing next to him. Farther back, under the ancient bluewood archway, Sky stared up at the glowing runes carved into the trial stone. He muttered under his breath, disbelief etched across his face. So this truly is Ethan's real strength. Soros wasn't dead after all. Ethan had assumed that, even if he managed to take first place, his victory would be much like last time, merely edging out Guga. He certainly didn't expect his true strength to be so overwhelming. When the examiner announced the final tally, a hush fell over the crowd. Gasps rippled through the room as everyone stared at him, trying to process what they just witnessed. Calmly, Ethan recalled his dark crow and stepped away from the trial station, rejoining his fellow candidates. Before his turn, they'd clustered around him in respectful silence. Now they pressed even closer, their admiration palpable. They felt lucky to be following such a powerful trainer. With Ethan leading the way, the challenges of Trial Island would seem far less daunting, and their own standings in the future, rocket rankings were sure to rise alongside his. No other result came close to matching Ethan's performance, except one. Sky, wielding the gas bomb she'd just claimed from Soros, delivered a flawless strike that registered an astonishing attack value of 288. Even Ethan couldn't hide his surprise at her skill. Ethan sat back and watched the last of the scores flash across the holo projector. It wasn't long before every test result was in, and despite a few oddities, the standings hardly shifted. Ethan still led the pack by a mile, his attack stat clocking in at an astonishing 458 points. Behind him, in order, were Guga with his Abba Snake, 337 points, Alec and his newly evolved Great Wolf Dog, 330 points, Jasmine's Ultrasonic Bat, 308 points, Sky's Gas Bomb Creature, 288 points s. Kai's Gas Bomb wasn't exactly an offensive powerhouse. It had only just been tamed, and it certainly didn't fight like the direct strike species most trainers preferred. Yet Sky's skill in handling it lifted her into 5th place, bumping Soros down a notch. Alec's Wolf Dog evolution also vaulted him from 4th to 3rd, but otherwise the top ranks remained comfortably familiar. As the hologram dimmed, a small notification blinked in Ethan's vision. It called out several contestants whose scores hovered in the 20s, hardly impressive numbers, yet each name carried a discrete special marker. Ethan frowned. Why highlight them? Were they hiding some secret talent, or was there another mystery afoot? He tucked the question away for later. For now, he'd celebrate another clear victory, while keeping an eye on those enigmatic underdogs. Cough! The rocket examiner cleared his throat from his seat on the judge's bench, instantly drawing every eye back to the stage. The basic test is now complete, he announced, his voice measured and cold. Under our new rules, any trainer who feels dissatisfied with their ranking may issue a challenge to an opponent up to 10 places above them. Each trainer gets exactly one challenge. Win the duel, and you take your adversary's rank. Lose, and you'll drop 10 spots. This contest is a fight to the death. He let the threat hang in the tense silence before continuing. Where the initial trial measured an elf's raw attack power, this live combat will test you, your tactical skill, your ability to command under pressure, and the depth of your bond with your elf. After all, how an elf fights isn't determined solely by strength or training. It's also shaped by your leadership. In a challenge like this, you and your opponent become each other's mortal enemies. Should you fail, the consequences could be permanent. Applause rolled through the arena as the examiner's gavel came down. For a moment, the spectators erupted in cheers. Then, almost as suddenly, the roar died away. A tense hush fell over the square. The other challengers exchanged uneasy glances. Many had felt they'd underperformed. After all, their summoned beasts had been built for support, not all-out aggression. And now, faced with a true fight to the finish, their earlier confidence had evaporated. It was one thing to stand by and watch someone else risk everything. It was quite another to put your own life on the line. As each fallen contender was carried off, dread settled like a stone in every stomach. Those brave enough to have spoken of joining the trial before now found themselves silent, their nerves frayed by the grim reminder that this was no mere game. Ethan leaned casually against the edge of the trial bench, surveying the crowd with detached interest. His eyes drifted over the remaining victor, Guga, before settling on him with a faint, inscrutable smile. Guga met Ethan's gaze, heart pounding. He'd spent the whole test watching Ethan, and now it was clear why. Ethan's spectacular performance had forced everyone, Guga included, into a corner with only the hardest choices left to make. The moment Ethan's eyes locked onto him, Guga's resolve snapped into place. Ha! You're all a bunch of nobodies. I'm first here, so I challenge, for first place, Ethan. Clenching his fists and lifting his chin defiantly, Guga turned to the examiner and issued his challenge. Chapter 74. The challenge begins. I challenge the first-place contender, Ethan. With those words, Guga's hesitation vanished. He strode decisively to the sparring arena, his prized Abba snake coiled at his feet, leaving no doubt about his intent. As Guga took his place, the crowd's murmur swelled into a roar of attention. Every pair of eyes followed him, fueling the challenger's confidence until his features practically gleamed with pride. From the stands, the Rocket League examiner furrowed his brow, his gaze shifting from Guga to the petite but deadly venomous serpent perched nearby. Guga's reputation was no secret within the entire Rocket League complex. By issuing a direct challenge to Ethan, the undefeated champion, he risked provoking his brother's wrath should anything go awry. The examiner, aware of the political undercurrents, glanced up at Viper, the league's overseer. Viper's expression was unreadable but serious. He understood all too well why Guga had finally decided to strike back against Ethan's long-standing dominance. After a brief pause, Viper inclined his head, a silent command to proceed. The examiner raised his whistle to his lips, and the tension in the arena snapped taut as Guga squared off opposite the reigning champion. The challenge was officially on. After securing Viper's permission, the Rocket Examiner let out a quiet sigh. Truth be told, he'd rather have stayed out of this fight. His own rank and power were more than sufficient, and as one of Viper's lieutenants he had little fear of Guga's retaliation, but dealing with the fallout of a duel was never simple. Still, duty called, and as an official examiner he had no choice but to step forward. From the edge of the clearing, Guga's voice rang out, laced with laughter. "Ethan, what are you waiting for? Show me what you've really got. Don't hide behind a fancy title." Ethan stretched his neck lazily, lips curling into a faint smile. He'd anticipated this. His silent scrutiny had been enough to stir Guga's pride and provoke the challenge he'd been waiting for. If all went to plan, he'd soon depart the island for a time. After all, as the newly appointed leader here, he needed to maintain his influence even in absence. Clearing his throat, the Rocket Examiner stepped into the center and raised his voice. "Contestant number 234, Ethan, contestant number 99, Guga, has issued a formal challenge. Ethan, do you accept?" The moment hung in the air, a simple question that would decide the next turn of this fierce rivalry. If you forfeit, you automatically fail. Guga will take your place in the rankings and you'll drop 10 spots. Ethan only laughed, the sound rich with anticipation. Beside him, his raven familiar, its midnight feathers ruffled in excitement, fixed Ethan with a sharp, knowing gaze. It had long endured Guga's bluster, and its wings twitched, eager to clash with the aberrant snake waiting on the opposite side. "Challenge accepted," Ethan called, his voice calm as he strode onto the battlefield. The crowd watched in stunned silence. The examiner let out a sigh, barely suppressing his frustration. Of all the matchups he'd hoped to avoid, this was the worst. He knew Guga's true identity, and he'd caught wind of what had happened to Ethan in the Shadow Trials. Rumor even had it that the Viper Guard had whispered of Ethan's exploits. Yet those shadowy rumors paled beside the spectacle of Guga's brother. "This duel is to the death," the examiner's voice rang out. "Each competitor may summon exactly one creature. There are no other restrictions. The bout ends only when one side yields or falls." A hush filled the arena as the first test of the trials officially began. Every spectator held their breath, waiting for the showdown between Ethan and his raven and the feared, aberrant snake of Guga. Guga's signal cut through the tension in the square. "Abba snake, big gaze," he shouted. In an instant, the massive cobra lifted its hood, revealing the hypnotic pattern on its belly. The snake's innate intimidation skills surged, sending a low, rattling warning through the air. Ethan was ready. "Dark Crow, ascend! Distract it," he called. With a piercing cry, the ebony-feathered crow beat its wings against a swirl of pale white mist. It transformed into a streak of inky black light and vanished from sight, leaving the cobra's glare unfocused and its intimidation wasted. Guga's face darkened. His plan was unraveling, but he still had one ace to play. "Dark Crow, assault with full force." Suddenly, two ominous pulses of sound exploded outward, one reverberating off the cobblestones, the other thundering from above. Invisible yet overwhelming, the shockwaves rippled through the gathered elves and townsfolk, forcing them to cover their ears in discomfort. On the ground, the giant snake writhed helplessly, unable to counter the brutal aerial assault of Ethan's Dark Crow. Trapped under the crow's relentless sonic onslaught, The cobra's intimidating display was reduced to a futile hiss. The battle had shifted, and in that moment, the advantage lay firmly with Ethan. Ethan crouched behind the scorched ridge, Aber coiled at his side, every scale tensed and ready. For minutes, they'd lain in wait, eyes locked on the circling dark crow. Then, in a sudden roar, the crow unleashed its plutonian smash, its talons digging into the earth with enough force to send up a cloud of dust. Before Aber could strike, wings crackling with flight system energy swept down and slammed him against the ground. The impact rattled every vertebra in the great serpent's body. Aber's jaws snapped shut in surprise, but he'd hesitated long enough. The crow's power was far greater than anticipated. As Aber struggled to right himself, the crow rose into the sky, talons dripping with sandy debris. Ethan shouted, "Aber, hold your ground, now!" The serpent's violet eyes flared. With astonishing speed, Aber lunged forward, coils whipping the air. Fangs bared, he aimed for the crow's legs, but the bird was already banked out of reach. Ethan didn't waste a second. Dissolution tincture. Use it! Aber's belly swelled. From his open maw sprayed a jet of corrosive purple liquid. It struck the crow's flanks as it banked away, hissing fiercely on contact. Feathers sizzled and dissolved, trailing wisps of acrid smoke. The dark crow screeched in fury and pain. Its defenses shattered as patches of plumage sloughed off. Hovering just above Aber's head, the wounded beast shook itself free of the acid, glaring down with renewed caution. Ethan exchanged a quick grin with his ally. With the crow's flight capabilities compromised and its armor weakened, the battle had just turned in their favor. After that first clash of blades, my opponent and I immediately sprang apart, each of us taking up a stance at opposite ends of the clearing. In that single strike, I'd already gauged his strength and seen the same fierce resolve burning in his eyes that ignited mine. Neither of us intended to hold back. This was a true duel, and we were both ready to prove ourselves in the heat of battle. Chapter 75, The Second Round, Part 3. Guga ground her teeth, casting a frustrated glance across the plaza at Qingmu, who stood motionless at the far edge, arms folded and expression unreadable. The weight of disappointment settled in her chest. Her Arbok was strong and resilient, but it simply couldn't match the speed and relentless assault of Ethan's Murkrow. Every time Arbok lunged with acid, Murkrow spiraled away, shrieking its mocking taunt before diving back in with sharp peck strikes. Arbok's hood flared as it panted, body trembling from the barrage. Even so, it refused to back down. Its loyalty to Guga held it in place. Murkrow hovered just out of reach, eyes gleaming with battle fervor. Though the poison type's acid attack had grazed him, it was nothing more than a minor sting to a Pokémon accustomed to wild skirmishes. Ethan leaned casually against the railing, watching the two opponents circle each other. He called out, voice cool and confident, "Give it up, Guga. You won't win this." He had no desire to hold back. This was a fight to the finish. Guga's brother, the Rocket's captain, was a formidable name in the league, and Ethan admitted to himself he felt a twinge of respect and a bit of unease when he faced her. Still, respect didn't mean mercy. As Arbok reared back for another strike, Guga clenched her Pokeball, determination blazing in her eyes. The battle wasn't over yet, but if she wanted to turn the tide, she'd have to outwit Murkrow's aerial tactics and find an opening before Arbok could endure another flurry of pecks. Silence fell over the square, broken only by the rustle of feathers and the hiss of defiance, as challenger and champion braced themselves for the next exchange. Having slain the Abai snake, Guga swore he would have complete vengeance. Once you became his enemy, even if you were Ethan, brother to the renowned Grand Captain, he would show no mercy. With a lifetime of battle experience and Ethan's chip-enhanced support, Guga was certain he could surpass every foe before him and finally settle this grudge. His confidence was total. What he needed was time to grow stronger. Ethan's impassioned plea for restraint, though blunt and relentless, cut Guga to the core of his pride. Without a word more, Guga made his decision. He flicked his wrist at the Rocket's belt slung low on his hip, and a smooth purple-black orb materialized in his palm. Ethan's brow furrowed as a nagging sense of dread crept up his spine. He stared at the sphere, jaw set. "You forced my hand," Guga snarled, his teeth clicking together. "Now prepare to die." He flung the dark orb toward Aberdeer. The creature, knowing exactly what it was, snapped it up and swallowed it whole. In the stands, the observing serpent's scales rippled with displeasure as it watched the silent transaction, but it made no move to intervene. Ethan recognized it at once. The small violet orb in Guga's hand was listed on Team Rocket's redemption register. Its description clearly stated that, when ingested, it could multiply an elf-type Pokemon's venom energy by 5-fold. Such a potent boost came at a dreadful cost. The creature would be left utterly debilitated for an entire week afterward. Guga's eyes gleamed. He intended to play his trump card now, to crush Ethan once and for all. In this trial, no one else could hope to interfere, and even if Ethan's Pokemon were rendered useless for 7 days, Guga was confident he could seize victory regardless. This pill had been entrusted to Guga by his older brother before the latter's expedition to the island, a last resort for truly desperate circumstances. Cornered by Ethan's relentless pressure, Guga had no choice but to unleash it. "Arbok, take it!" Guga barked. With a swift motion, he forced the purple orb past the Cobra Pokemon's jaws. A strangled roar echoed through the chamber. Arbok writhed as an enormous surge of poisonous energy burst through his body, far exceeding his normal limits. His coils swelled, and a shimmering lilac mist seeped from the edges of his hood, spiraling around him like a living fog. Ethan's heart pounded. The transformation was breathtaking, but at what cost? In moments, Arbok had become a living weapon of venomous power, and immediately the terrible side effects would begin to take their toll. Ethan's pulse spiked as the lilac mist hissed against the earth, bubbling the soil beneath his feet before he could even blink. "Abo, poison needles," Guga barked. The venomous serpent coiled at Guga's side sprang into action, spitting dozens of long, purple-tipped quills glistening with potent toxin. They streaked through the air, aimed squarely at the Dark Crow. "Win, Dark Crow, scatter those needles!" Ethan shouted. At his command, the inky feathered bird beat its wings, gathering a tight white whirlwind on each wingtip. For a moment, the swirling gusts met the onslaught of poison quills, but instead of stopping them, the cyclone cleaved right through the barrage. Only a faint purple haze clung to the needles. Otherwise, the venomous shafts continued their deadly flight, unimpeded. Ethan barely had time to react when a volley of poisoned needles streaked toward the Dark Crow. On impact, tendrils of purple haze curled across its coal-black feathers, clear proof of the toxin's potency. Ethan's brow furrowed. He hadn't realized Guga possessed such a deadly secondary skill. No wonder she'd always bragged about being a formidable partner. From across the clearing, Guga threw back her head and laughed, triumphant. "Ha! You thought you could overlook me, Ethan. Now that your raven is poisoned, you won't finish off the Abersnake so easily." She snapped her fingers, eyes glittering with victory. With the Dark Crow weakened, the tide of battle was rapidly shifting in her favor. Ethan steeled himself. "Dark Crow, follow the updraft and unleash Wingslash. Strike now." A low croak of discomfort slipped from the Dark Crow's beak as it fought through the toxin's sting. Then its wings blazed into a streak of midnight light, beating the air in a single devastating arc. Wingslash was the bird's most powerful attack, a decisive move for a swift finish. Guga's voice cut through the wind. "Abersnake! Ghostface!" From the serpent's maw came a chilling wail as a spectral mask formed in midair, its hollow eyes fixed on the Dark Crow. The battlefield crackled with tension. Ethan had struck back, but Guga's own counterattack was already taking shape. Neither side would yield without a final fierce clash. "Use your fangs now," Guga snarled, his eyes glinting with murderous intent. He signaled Aber, his venomous snake, to unleash its deadliest toxin. Across the clearing, the Dark Crow hesitated for the briefest moment, its spectral mask of feathers flickering with uncertainty before flapping its wings and diving in. Aber coiled in a flash, striking upward. A sickening snap rang out as the snake's poison-laced fangs tore into the crow's wing. "Cha!" the crow screeched, battering Aber with desperate blows. But the snake's venom had already taken hold. A bruise of purple spread beneath the crow's feathers, blackening into a crown of dark poison that seeped deeper with every pulse. Guga threw back his head and laughed, a cold, triumphant sound. "Today, Ethan, you bleed under my command." He watched as Aber sank its fangs in again, each bite driving the toxin further into the bird's veins. Ethan's companion faltered in midair, feathers drooping as its wing grew heavy. Guga's confidence swelled. Once Ethan was down for the count, no one would dare challenge him, not even for a week. And with that, he advanced, ready to deliver the final blow. What he hadn't expected was that Ethan would suddenly burst into laughter. If you enjoyed this chapter, please bookmark and recommend. Chapter 76, Challenge 3, Mon and Wed. As soon as Ethan's calm smile appeared, Gugu triggered a stun, an electric pulse meant to lock him in place. Yet Ethan only chuckled. All around the crowded market, watchers stiffened in surprise. They'd seen him falter before. Now when he was cornered, he actually grinned. Was he mocking Gugu? Ethan raised a hand in front of his rocket's belt buckle. In an instant, a tiny remote control and a pale yellow capsule materialized in his palm. Every gaze in the square snapped to those two items. The remote was nothing special, just a basic retrieval device from the rocket's rewards catalog. But the pill, that was a standard antidote, redeemable for a mere 10 points. Useful, yes, but useless against the Dark Crow's virulent toxin. Gugu threw back his head and laughed. You've got to be joking, Ethan. That cheap cure won't neutralize the Abba Snake's poison, let alone the Dark Crow's wound toxin. The crowd stirred. They'd assumed Ethan must have some hidden ace up his sleeve, but this was hardly it. The antidote could only dull minor poisons. It was no match for the deadly toxin coursing through his veins. Ethan's smile widened. He tucked the remote into his belt and held the pill between thumb and forefinger as if it were the most precious treasure. Is that all you see, Gugu? He asked softly, his eyes glittering. Dark Crow's toxin, or something even darker? With that enigmatic question, Ethan seemed to grow more confident, as if the only thing standing between him and victory was precisely this moment of showdown. The market fell silent, waiting to see what he would do next, and whether Gugu had truly underestimated him. Gah! Dark Crow snarled as his eyes locked onto the remote in Ethan's hand. Since their last clash, Ethan had never removed the weighted band strapped across his arms and torso. No one had expected him to reveal his secret weapon now. Dark Crow felt a surge of confidence, certain the extra burden would slow Ethan down for good. Nearby, Bisky's brow creased with concern. Ethan's apparent handicap unsettled him. If Ethan fell here, the coming battles would only grow more perilous. What Bisky didn't yet realize was that Ethan's unassuming restraint held its own cunning. Look at the remote. That's a custom-weighted controller from the rockets, someone finally cried, pointing at the device affixed to Ethan's wrist. In an instant, every gaze snapped to it, shock rippling through the onlookers. How had Ethan maintained such a load, outpacing Dark Crow's legendary speed all this time? Why unleash it only at this critical juncture? As the truth sank in, a dozen questions bloomed in their minds, each more astonished than the last. Ethan ignored the horrified gasps of the onlookers. With one hand, he discreetly tapped the remote control at his waist. With the other, he tossed the small antidote canister toward Dark Crow. Gah! Dark Crow squawked, startled. As the vial spun through the air, it flashed with light and dissolved against his feathers. Though the toxin still coursed through his veins, the antidote's suppressive effect began to take hold. Do you really think you can beat me? Snarled Singu, his eyes glittering with confidence. Abai Snake, Poison Needle, show him your venom. Ethan didn't hesitate. Dark Crow, dodge, then close in. Wings out. Dark Crow banked sharply to the side, letting a storm of green-tipped needles whiz past. Then, feathered wings beating in a blur, he rocketed toward Abai Snake. His speed had improved so dramatically that the long-range strike of Poison Needle simply couldn't track him. Good, Shingu murmured. Now finish him. Abai Snake, Ghost Fang. As Abai Snake coiled and lunged, fangs bared, Dark Crow was already careening down from above, ready to unleash his own counterattack. Just like before, both Abersnake and the Dark Crow were wounded again. The poison coursing through the Dark Crow's veins had only deepened, steadily sapping its stamina. Ethan's lips curved into a faint smirk. Was all that weight training lie for nothing? He studied the crow's poisoned form and barked an order to his serpent companion. Abersnake's pain receptors, already inundated by the purple pill's venomous boost, had dulled significantly. Though the Dark Crow's strike still packed brutal force, they no longer seared with the same intensity as before. Abersnake coiled, eyes blazing, ready to unleash Poison Fang once more. Crack! This time, however, their timing was off. As Abersnake's fangs descended, the Dark Crow surged sideways in a blur, evading the strike by mere inches. "Dark Crow, don't let up! Keep those wings thrashing!" Guga shouted. They needed to finish this while the creature was still compromised. "Abersnake, hang in there! Ghostface, then Poison Fang," Ethan called. Even with their renewed assault, the crow's speed remained daunting. Their only hope lay in Ghostface's slowing effect, and thankfully, it finally activated. A pale, spectral aura wrapped around the Dark Crow, dragging its movements into a sluggish crawl. Now that the tide had turned, Ethan and his allies were ready to press their advantage. "Dark Crow, hold on!" Just as the Abersnake's venomous fangs descended toward his summoned beast, Ethan's voice cut across the arena like a razor. A dark green barrier flickered to life around Dark Crow, deflecting the snake's lethal strike. Ethan had taught Dark Crow the last resort shield skill, and in this critical moment, it held. Seizing the chance, Dark Crow's crimson wings sliced through the air in a deadly arc. Its razor-sharp feathers bit into the Abersnake's scales with a thunderous crack. Bam! The impact sent the snake hurtling into the far corner of the battlefield, utterly incapacitated. Where it once coiled with barely contained ferocity, it now lay motionless, beaten back by a relentless flurry of wing strikes. Guga's Abersnake had been formidable, especially after dosing itself with that mysterious purple elixir, but it simply couldn't withstand Dark Crow's full-power assault. The crowd erupted. Whispers and gasps rippled through the stands. No one had anticipated this turn of events, a complete reversal in the blink of an eye. "Dark Crow, finish it!" A sudden shout rose from the audience. But before the beast could deliver the final blow, Ethan's voice rang out again, cold and unshakable. The arena fell silent. Every spectator froze, eyes locked on him, hearts pounding in stunned anticipation of his next command. Ethan stood across from Guga, expression unreadable. Rumor had it that Guga's older brother was a captain in the Rocket Corps, and yet Ethan felt no trace of intimidation. In his eyes, once Guga had issued that formal death decree, their enmity was sealed. "If you intend to kill me," Ethan said quietly, "you must be prepared to die yourself." Without another word, Ethan summoned his partner Pokémon, Dark Raven. The massive bird let out a rattling cry and dove, talons extended, straight for Guga's prized viper. "Stop!" Guga sprinted forward, eyes blazing. A Rocket Corps examiner standing nearby, forced into action by Guga's family ties, shouted as well, "Halt the attack!" But Ethan's gaze never wavered from the twisting form of the snake. At last, in a tone that brooked no argument, he called out, "Cease fire, Raven. Just teach him a lesson. Don't kill him." Before Dark Raven could strike, a second voice rang out, this one firm enough to carry over the crow's shriek. The island's viper instructor, the single most respected authority on venomous snakes, strode between combatants and raised his hand. "Dark Raven, stop!" Ethan frowned but nodded. With one last threatening croak, Dark Raven pulled up and landed on its master's outstretched arm. Around them, the examiners and trainers let out relieved exhalations. They could tolerate fierce rivalries and high-stakes tests, but a dead viper, especially Guga's, a Pokémon with lethal venom gland injuries, that would be a catastrophe nobody here could ignore. Sure, I'd be happy to help polish that chapter. Could you please paste the full text of the machine translated chapter here? Once I have it, I'll rewrite it into smooth idiomatic English, rename Aoki to Ethan, and ensure he's clearly portrayed as male. Chapter 77, One Eye Down, one of his eyes, ripped out, the Dark Crow. This time the Dark Crow, which had held back before, struck with lightning speed. Before Guga could even react, the bird dove in on the viper, tearing out one of his eyes in a spray of blood. As it lifted off, the severed globe dropped to the sand. "Eat it, Abo Snake!" Guga roared, heart pounding as he sprinted forward. Without a moment's hesitation, the Dark Crow swooped back, snatched the eye in its beak, and swallowed it whole. The arena fell deathly silent. No one dared move or speak. Even the viper, bleeding, dazed, defeated, could only stand there, helpless. After all, he was the one who'd insisted on these life-and-death rules. He had no right now to protest. Ethan shifted his gaze from Guga to the viper. He stared unflinchingly, his eyes cool yet questioning, as if demanding an explanation. Ethan refused to believe that his brother's middle-tier rank in the Rockets was enough to topple an elite like the Viper. There had to be more at work here. some advantage or hidden skill that Guga wielded. Caught in Ethan's intense scrutiny, the Viper brushed a trembling hand against his bleeding brow. He wasn't angry at Ethan's stare. Rather, he was wary. There were truths he dared not admit aloud. In the hush that followed, every fighter waited, wondering what would come next. "It works!" Ethan's voice rang out with undeniable conviction. As chief instructor of the Rockets, he had tested countless antidotes and serums before, but none had ever produced results like this. Until now, challengers had faltered and failed under his watch. Yet in that moment, even the venomous Aberdeen snake seemed to acknowledge a different outcome. The massive serpent recoiled, its iridescent scales rippling as it tried to speak, only to fall silent, its threat conveyed in a furious glare. Ethan realized then that this trial was unlike any other. He had pushed the boundaries of their contest further than anyone had dared. A moment later, the dark crow swooped in, talons outstretched, but veered away at the last second, its frustration palpable. Still smarting from the snake's poison, the bird circled back and with a savage plunge pecked out its enemy's eyes. At last, its long-held grudge found release. Ethan knelt beside his companion, gently ruffling the crow's glossy feathers. He drew 5 small vials from his belt, the antidotes he'd prepared, and fed them to the recovering bird one by one. He could only marvel at how the Aberdeen's venom, enhanced by that purple pill, had grown more potent than any toxin he'd seen. It wasn't until the 5th dose that the darkness fled from the crow's eyes and it gave a trembling, relieved caw. Ethan watched as Gugia staggered toward the wounded Aberdeen snake. Frantically, Gugia rummaged through the vials strapped to his belt, then spooned cold, white granules into the creature's gaping maw. Immediately afterward, he blasted the raw wound with a potent antiseptic spray to staunch the bleeding. The sting of disinfectant was so fierce that the sedated serpent trembled in its enforced slumber. Under normal circumstances, an elf, deprived of its combat senses, could make a full recovery with prompt treatment. But this case was far more dire. Earlier, Ethan had forced the zoozy purple pill down the Abersnake's throat. The pill's lingering side effects dulled the creature's perception as a twisted form of self-preservation. Without a swift antidote, that sensory suppression risked becoming permanent. Over time, the pill's toxins could even erode the serpent's very constitution, stripping it of the hunting prowess for which Abersnake was renowned. As if that weren't enough, Ethan's own blade had already claimed one of the serpent's eyes, a loss that alone slashed its combat effectiveness by roughly 20%. Confronted with the grim reality of what he'd done, Ethan felt his anger ebb away. He folded his arms, watching Gugia at work, and at last abandoned any thought of finishing off either the healer or the wounded beast. Instead, he stood silent, uncertainty and regret flickering across his face. Ethan's victory was absolute. From the first clash, it was clear he'd grown stronger than Guga, and not by accident. Though Guga had struck with blunt force, Ethan countered effortlessly, their old bitter rivalry laid bare for all to see. By the end, Ethan merely swept aside Guga's abai serpent like a nuisance, leaving it broken and unable to continue. Desperate, Guga poured potion after potion into his creature, even the foul-tasting purple pill, but to no avail. A hush fell over the arena as Ethan, accompanied by his dark crow, stepped away from the battlefield. The chief examiner's voice rang out. The duel is concluded, challenger defeated, ranking reduced by 10 places. Gritting his teeth, Guga knelt beside his wounded serpent, fighting back tears as he stemmed the bleeding with the last of his healing herbs. He cradled the creature in its elf ball, and without a backward glance, slipped down the steps and out of the square. His limbs felt heavy, his spirit heavier still. If the serpent hadn't intercepted that final strike, he might not be alive now. That crushing defeat was the hardest lesson yet. There would always be someone stronger, and he still had far to go. Setting his jaw, Guga vowed inwardly to close the gap. Just then, Ethan's silhouette appeared at the edge of the crowd, the dark crow perched on his shoulder. Guga looked up, forced a nod of respect, and allowed a flicker of determination to replace the sting of failure. Next time, he promised himself, he would be ready. After a moment's careful thought, Sky unleashed the last of his sacred flame. He still remembered his shock when Ethan had first soared to the top of the rankings, with an attack rating of 458 points. At the time, Sky hadn't realized that the dark raven he faced was holding back. Only when the ancient cards were fully expended did those ravens awaken in all their fury. Blistering speed and crushing power laid waste to everything in their path. Now he saw the truth. Ethan did not command a single dark raven, but two devastating allies, one a spectral crow, the other a hulking beast whose strength rivaled the ravens. Reflecting on those combined powers, Sky felt his perspective shift completely. In that instant, his resolve solidified. With Ethan's tremendous potential and unshakable will, putting his trust in him no longer seemed unreasonable. At Ethan's final command, Sky surrendered his doubts. Betrayal was unthinkable. Ethan's force of strength and character had conquered him utterly. "Master Ethan," Sky asked, bowing his head, "shall I administer a healing spell?" "We still have a few left," Ethan said, eyeing the small vials on the table. Sky, who had stood back until now, suddenly closed the distance between them. His posture was more urgent than before, and the deference in his voice rang genuine. Ethan raised an eyebrow in surprise. He'd never seen Sky so outwardly concerned. Sky reached for one of the healing potions, but Ethan raised a hand to stop him. "No need," he said firmly. "Dark Crow's already purged the toxins. He's in solid shape. Let's save these for someone who truly needs them." Behind Ethan, 24 fighters stirred with excitement. To serve under such a formidable leader was a rare privilege. They felt luckier than ever to have joined his ranks. Just moments ago, Ethan's duel with Guga had drawn the first real blood of the tournament, a thrilling opener that left the watching crowd buzzing. A handful of challengers had boldly stepped forward, eager to prove themselves. But after witnessing the sheer ferocity of that clash, any further attempts at glory now felt almost trivial. This was a life-and-death arena, yet few here sought needless slaughter. Every soul still standing on Trial Island had honed their instincts well. The moment they realized they couldn't win, they withdrew without a second thought. In a place like this, survival depended as much on knowing when to fight as on knowing when to walk away. Giving up the fight only knocks 10 spots off your ranking, and a stalemate can spiral into chaos. Besides, only the top 10 earn a reward. Any lower placement is virtually meaningless. The real horror, everyone knew, was the duel for last place. The sole loser in that match was eliminated on the spot. Elimination meant death. Since the outcome was inevitable for someone, why not throw caution to the wind, block every challenge, and fight until the very end? After the opening round wrapped up, the competitors who'd narrowly escaped last place began taking turns diving into increasingly reckless confrontations. Casualties mounted rapidly. By evening, the testing grounds echoed with anguished cries as the trial ground itself seemed ready to close its gates on the survivors. 5 contestants had already fallen that day. 3 were miraculously revived by medics, but 2 elves, denied timely treatment, succumbed to their injuries. Under normal rules, those eliminated by death would at least be spared from future trials. But Venom Snake's new regulation, ironically dubbed merciless by the test committee, ensured that even survivors of this round were marked for execution in the next. With that cruel twist, the contest had devolved into a savage free-for-all, where every lesson relearned came at the price of blood. "Sure. Happy to help. Could you please paste the chapter text you'd like me to revise? Once I have the full content, I'll rewrite it into clear, idiomatic English with Ethan as the male protagonist." Chapter 78. Rocket's 3 Cadres, 3-3. A massive freighter plowed through the endless sea, its towering smokestack releasing a thick plume of white vapor that shot skyward like a solitary column rising from a desert floor. On the foredeck, a young man with jet black hair stood with his hands resting lightly on the rail, leaning forward as the sea breeze tousled his clothes. The salt-tinged air felt fresh and cool against his skin. Beside him perched a sleek, black, bird-like elf, its sharp eyes scanning the distant horizon. This was Ethan and his companion, Dark Raven. After Ethan's performance in the final trial, Lord Ying had deemed his results sufficiently impressive, and so, by their earlier agreement, he'd been granted permission to leave the island ahead of schedule. This freighter wasn't just any ship. It was the monthly rocket cargo vessel that supplied and re-equipped the Trial Island's outposts. With Lord Ying's blessing, Ethan had boarded for the voyage home. Though he had once set foot off the island before, back in his previous life, that departure had been blind. He'd stumbled more by chance than by design. This time, however, the rocket freighter followed a fixed course, its navigational systems honed to perfection. Before long, it would chart a direct route back to the mainland. Ethan closed his eyes, breathing deeply. Despite the trials he'd endured, and the uncertainty that still lay ahead, this moment felt like a new beginning. Dark Raven let out a low, resonant caw, as if echoing his thoughts, and together they watched the endless blue sea stretch out toward home. Ethan had discovered that the so-called original Trial Island lay somewhere along the maritime boundary between Kanto and Chengdu. The moment he realized its location, the question came drifting over the rail behind him. "How's it feel?" a gravelly voice asked. "It's been less than a month since we set sail, but doesn't it already seem like we've cut ourselves off from the civilized world?" Ethan and his jet-black Raven stood side by side on the deck, both staring out at the unbroken line of the horizon. The Raven's feathers caught the salt breeze. Ethan thought he could taste the sea air on his tongue. From the cargo hold's hatch, Master Ying emerged, his boots clacking lightly on the wooden planks as he made his way forward. In one fluid motion, he leaned on the railing next to them. "Master Ying," Ethan greeted reflexively, nodding his head in respect. Ying waved him off with a half-smile. Despite his high rank in the rockets, ceremony bored him. To Ying, only strength mattered, and those who possessed it earned their privileges. Ethan had no obvious power to speak of, but Ying had seen something in him. That was reason enough not to keep Ethan at arm's length. Ethan shrugged, turning back to the rolling waves. "To be honest, I don't feel much different. I was an orphan long before I ever heard of Trial Island. Surviving in society and surviving on some remote island, it's the same rule. Weakness gets you crushed. It's a dog-eat-dog world. You either eat or get eaten." Master Ying tapped his chin thoughtfully. Around them, the ship creaked as it cut through the waters, carrying them ever closer to whatever challenges awaited on the island's shore. And in that moment, Ethan felt anything but unprepared. Ethan's voice was soft but steady. "Even though those memories are fading, the echo of what I felt still lingers in my bones." Yingkai listened, caught off guard for a moment, then offered a genuine smile. "It seems our paths have taught us much the same lessons." His eyes grew distant, half-lidded, as if tracing long-buried recollections. For a while, neither spoke. The only sound was the wind tearing across the deck and the steady slap of waves against the hull. At last, Yingkai blinked and shook his head, a rueful laugh escaping him. "After everything I've been through, I still can't stop looking back." Ethan returned the smile, his expression calm and unreadable. Though Yingkai was famed as the rocket's shadow leader, cold, efficient, and unhesitating, Ethan had discovered beneath that reputation a man who, when he let his guard down, was as approachable as a kindly uncle at a family gathering. Ethan reached inside his jacket and produced a slim metallic card. "I had someone draw this up for you," he said, handing it over. "It's your Alliance ID. All your credentials have been fully processed." Yingkai took the card, turning it over in his hand. For the first time that evening, there was a spark of anticipation in his eyes. As long as the Alliance elders below the Four Heavens level inspect these credentials, there won't be the slightest problem. Ying reached into his pocket and withdrew an official Alliance identification card, along with what appeared to be a stranger's face, carefully wrapped and folded. He handed both items to Ethan. Chi-Ching-Mu's eyes widened in surprise. If Ying had gone to the trouble of personally arranging Alliance membership papers for him, that meant Ethan would carry a perfectly legitimate identity, free to move under the open sky, without ever raising suspicion. Ying smiled as he produced a second object, a mask so thin it resembled a cicada's wing. "This is a synthetic human skin mask," he explained. "It was engineered by the top experts in the rocket division. Unless someone slices or burns it, no one, no matter how familiar, can tell it's false. The mask's features are molded to match the photograph on your new ID, down to the last pore." He tossed the delicate mask to Ethan. Paired with the Alliance card, the disguise would fool even his closest acquaintances. Of course, this plan relied on the elves never revealing Ethan's true self. With these two items in hand, the legitimate credentials and the flawless mask, Ethan knew he could operate under two separate identities, each perfectly suited to his needs. Ethan settled deeper into his seat as the shuttle hummed through the stratosphere. Dark Crow, the elf who'd served him on his very first rockets mission, and its unwittingly powerful companion Beast would soon become his covert agents within the League. If he could maintain the separation between his two identities, he might even infiltrate their ranks, working from the inside to claim the Alliance throne for himself. Just like a Jew. With resources channeling in from both sides, his power would grow exponentially, and no one would suspect that behind Ethan's polished facade lay a second, far darker persona. Ying reappeared at the cabin doorway, her silhouette backlit by the corridor lights. In one deft motion, she held out a slim, steel-edged ID card embossed with the Alliance seal, and beside it, a disturbingly lifelike human skin mask. "These are your new credentials," she said quietly, her eyes sharp. "You'll need them to pass for one of us." Ethan slipped the card into his jacket pocket and studied the mask in his gloved hand. Its pale surface was frighteningly real, the perfect tool for becoming someone else entirely. He nodded, heart pounding. Ying's plan depended on him playing both sides flawlessly. "It's 30 minutes to Dead City," she continued. "Once we arrive, you disembark alone. Then, come find me to collect your medal. After that, head to the Angry Lakes rocket base in Kaji, Chengdu. A contact will reach out with further instructions. Retrieve the item they need, and our alliance grows stronger." She exhaled and stepped back, disappearing again into the shuttle's interior. Ethan stared at the small window, watching the desert wastes of Dead City draw closer. Clutching the ID card and mask, he steeled himself. The moment for playing both roles had come, and with it, the chance to reshape the balance of power across the entire alliance. It's no surprise that the Pokémon League has never uncovered Team Rocket's Trial Island. Tucked away in Deadleaf City, Majishi's stronghold and one of Rocket's 3 senior commanders, it remains completely off the grid, its operations hidden from League investigators. Team Rocket's 3 top operatives are spread across the region. Majishi in Deadleaf City, Nazi in Golden City, Aju in Light Red City. These 3 are Sakagi's most deeply embedded agents within the League. Of the trio, Aju, the ruler of Light Red City, is the deadliest. When the once united Quartz Alliance in the Guandu area split into Kanto and Chengdu factions, Aju seized the title Poison King of Chengdu, cementing himself as one of Sakagi's most trusted lieutenants. Though Majishi and Nazi haven't quite matched Aju's renown, they come close. Nazi even bears the nickname Super Queen. In a straight-up 6-on-6 battle, Aju would likely avoid sending Nazi into the ring. Her superpower ability is a natural counter to poison types. Instead, as a ninja, Aju excels at stealth attacks and precision assassinations, striking from the shadows before his foes know he's there. While Frontline's sheer strength and superhuman abilities nearly measure up to those of the king-tier elves, there remains a slight gap. Majishi, however, stands apart from Nazi and Aju. His greatest talent lies in directing large-scale engagements. Of the 3, he is unmatched at commanding legions in battle, much like a seasoned general leading an army. Each member contributes a unique strength, earning them the moniker of the Rocket's 3 senior officers. If you enjoyed this chapter, please bookmark and share. Chapter 79, Deadleaf City, Monday, Wednesday. When Ethan stepped through Deadleaf City's gates, the first thing that struck him was how serene the place felt. Tucked away in Kamba Province, it was home to the region's densest network of elf guilds, yet few would guess it also served as one of Rocket's most important strongholds in the Guandu area. That unlikely duality existed only because of Majishi's iron grip. No Rocket operative dared defy her here. As a result, despite the organization's formidable presence, the city remained remarkably calm. Ethan was no stranger to Deadleaf. In his previous life as a Rocket member, he'd walked its streets time and again. He knew that as long as you kept your head down and didn't poke at trouble, nothing unexpected would happen. But this trip carried a different weight. He had orders from Qingmu to move on to Kage City in Chengdu, a mission fraught with far more complications than simple reconnaissance or smuggling runs. His immediate destination was the Daoguan Pavilion in Lukaji, owned by Liu Bo. Feared and respected as an overlord of the Heavenly King tier, known by the codename Winter Willow, Lubo commanded a cadre of first-rank ice elves whose power far exceeded that of ordinary Uranus-class warriors. The pavilion was equal parts fortress and sanctuary, a place where strength was both proven and tested. Ethan paused by a reflecting pool near the city wall, checking his gear and steadying his breath. He'd faced dangers in universes far stranger than this one, and he was determined not to fail now. With a final glance over his shoulder at the glittering city above him, he set his course for Cage City. In Deadleaf, survival meant adapting to hidden rules, and Ethan intended to master them all. Ethan glanced at the harbor as the ship's gangplank clattered into place. 25 hours at sea had whetted his appetite for solid ground, and now that he was finally here, he could feel the tension drain from his shoulders. Without the backing of one of the Uranus Elite Four, Ethan knew he stood no real chance of contending for the Pokémon League Championship. Even Commander Lubo, who'd swept through Trial Island with barely a nod to trainers of Ethan's caliber, had made it plain that the Union considered Kaji City crucial to their plans. Unknown risks lay ahead, and the stakes were higher than ever. On deck, Ethan, formerly known as Aoki, had shed his austere Trial Island persona. The moment he donned a sleek Union trainer uniform and slipped on his lifelike human skin mask, his frosty demeanor vanished. Now, stepping off the freighter, it's as he looked every bit the eager newcomer. By his side padded a pale pink, slow-moving beast, his loyal companion through storm and calm. He inhaled deeply, tasting the salt on the breeze, feeling the timbered pier settle beneath his boots. Kanto's Deadleaf City awaited him, its bright lights and bustling streets brimming with opportunity and peril. Whatever lay in store, Ethan was ready to meet it head-on. Deadleaf City lies on the southern edge of the Kanto region, and its fortunes rise and fall with the tides. More than just a cargo hub, Deadleaf Port is Kanto's busiest harbor. Massive cruise liners like the Sante Anu, the Water Current, and the Haley Yanma berth here regularly. Though the city may not outshine the legendary Golden City in every respect, it's a close second, thanks largely to the generous port taxes that fuel rapid development. Local power broker Machishi's control of the Deadleaf City rocket team only adds to the prosperity and the intrigue. By the time Ethan stepped off the gangplank, dusk had settled over the docks. Lanterns glowed along the piers, and the streets beyond teemed with people, stevedores hauling cargo, merchants calling out their wares, families making their way home. Despite the rush, every face bore an easy smile, the kind that only comes from living in a place so comfortably prosperous. As a newcomer, Ethan blended into the ebb and flow without raising an eyebrow. In Deadleaf City, strangers arrive, daily, and tonight he was just another traveler passing through. Ethan's plan was unfolding exactly as he'd hoped. He had no desire to be treated like a wild animal, so he leaned into a new identity as a seasoned wilderness trainer. Although the brutal aura of Trial Island still clung to him, his prior experience had taught him how to mask it completely. To the casual observer, he was simply a veteran survivalist. No more, no less. The polished elven orb swinging from his belt and the two tamed beasts lumbering at his heels reinforced that image. As a result, nobody in Deadwood City dared to challenge him or pilfer his gear. Yet despite his careful disguise, Ethan faced one glaring problem. He was completely penniless. The moment of truth had arrived. He needed money, and quickly. Following a string of weathered signposts, he found himself in front of a small shop specializing in elven trappings. Inside, shelves overflowed with everything from carved wooden masks to gleaming crystal vials. Ethan emptied his pockets of every inconsequential trinket he'd picked up on the island. True valuables, locked away elsewhere, were out of reach, so he had to make do. After a brief negotiation, the shopkeeper counted out 5,000 Union coins and slid them across the counter. For the first time since leaving Trial Island, Ethan felt a glimmer of relief. With coin in hand, he could finally move forward. The Union ID card Ying had given him was impressively secure and doubled as a bank card, instantly crediting any exchanged funds. Ethan checked his balance. It had finally climbed from 0 to 5,000 Alliance coins. Satisfied, he stepped out of the elf's prop shop, followed the overhead signs, and made his way to the Kanba Elf Center at the very heart of the city. The Kanba Elf Center occupied nearly 2 football fields of space and soared 5 or 6 stories high. As a hospital devoted to treating injured elves, it maintained tight Alliance security, but Ethan, dressed in mock Alliance trainer attire, passed through without a second glance. A simple flash of his Union ID, and he was in. In his previous life, he'd rarely set foot in a Pokémon Center. As a child, he wasn't even allowed inside these strictly controlled facilities, and once he'd grown powerful, he'd no longer needed them. Visits to places like the Elf Center were few and far between. Yet here he was now, ready to see what lay beyond its doors. This was my first time back in the Elven Center since my rebirth, but I still remembered its layout well enough. The moment I stepped inside, I was greeted by the familiar hum of activity. Miss Joey at the reception desk, nurses and medics darting between treatment rooms, and even a few Geely eggs resting in incubation chambers. Trainers streamed in and out, each here to heal an injured elf, so the staff were perpetually busy, but remarkably organized. As one of the league's most vital facilities, the center runs on a strict ticketing system. Call your number, receive care, and move on. Beyond medical treatment, the Spirit Center also offers lodging for trainers who need to stay overnight. I'd come prepared to book a room, of course, but my main goal was to request a full checkup for my elves. Hidden injuries, what veteran breeders call dark wounds, can fester unnoticed, and I've learned firsthand how dangerous they can be. Better safe than sorry, I told myself, as I joined the queue to secure our accommodations and schedule those all-important examinations. Ethan knew these afflictions rarely showed themselves at first. Yet as the dark malady crept forward, it would coalesce into a virulent corruption, sapping an elf's strength, undermining their combat skills, and in its worst manifestations, proving fatal. At present, no sign of taint appeared in the elf under Ethan's care. His biochip reported normal vitals and no anomalies. Still, the chip's database held scant information on these dark injuries, and Ethan couldn't be certain he wasn't missing something. The only way to be sure was to run a full-spectrum diagnostic using all IANT's medical scanners, an exhaustive examination of every tissue, organ, and energy channel. Only then could he guarantee his companions' safety and their readiness for the battles ahead. If you enjoyed this chapter, please consider liking, saving, or recommending it. Your support means the world. Chapter 80, Pokémon Center, Tuesday, Wednesday. Team Rocket employs an army of scientists whose cutting-edge inventions often rival those of the Pokémon League. Yet in medical research and treatment, the League still holds an unshakable lead. At the very heart of its superiority stands the world's premier medical facility, the Pokémon Center. Without its advanced diagnostics and therapies, the battle effectiveness of League trainers would drop noticeably by at least one full tier, making the center's role indispensable to the League's stability. This morning, the waiting room was peaceful. Ethan took a number from the dispenser and found a seat among a handful of other trainers. When his ticket flashed on the digital board, he rose and approached the counter. A nurse, professional and courteous, welcomed him with a practiced smile. "Name?" she asked, tapping his number into her terminal. "Ethan," he replied. She nodded. "Routine checkup today? Blood pressure, reflexes, and overall health?" "Exactly," Ethan confirmed. "All right, just pull up that left sleeve, please." She secured a cuff around his arm and began her measurements. Across the room, Miss Joy, who handled the more severe injuries, was occupied with an emergency case, so this standard physical would be entirely managed by the nursing staff. Within minutes, the nurse completed the exam. "Everything looks good, Ethan. No concerns. Just keep up your regular training and nutrition." "Thanks," he said, sliding his arm free. He accepted the printout of his results and offered a polite nod. "Have a good day." "You too." The nurse returned his smile. "See you next time." Ethan tucked his chart under his arm and stepped out into the corridor. With his health clearance in hand, he felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Ethan stepped up to the medical center reception desk and set his Alliance ID card beside 3 sleek elven spheres. He offered the attendant a polite smile. Behind him, safely tucked away in their elven spheres, sat his bestial guardian, his phantom shade. And 2 other specimens, a dark crow and a second ghostly creature, which he'd chosen not to have scanned today. As an unregistered trainer traveling incognito, He knew no one would question which elves he kept in reserve. For now, only these three would undergo the full diagnostic. The attendant returned his smile with professional calm. A complete physical for 3 elves comes to 3,000 union coins. Would you care to pay in cash or have the amount debited directly from your account? Ethan slid his union ID into the card reader. A moment later, the screen confirmed his banking details. Please deduct it from my account, he said. Then he hesitated, glancing around the gleaming infirmary. By the way, do you offer overnight lodging here? I'd like to book a room. The attendant tapped a few keys. Certainly. We have standard and deluxe chambers available. Let me see what's free tonight. She began scrolling through the schedule as Ethan leaned back, relieved that both his elves and his accommodations were taken care of. Ethan stepped up to the reception desk. The clerk greeted him with a warm smile and said, "One night's accommodation is 500 union credits. Shall I deduct that together with your inspection fee?" "Yes, please. Let's handle the inspection first," Ethan replied. "Very good," she said, tapping expertly on her console. "Our Elf Center's examination is the most thorough in the entire Alliance. Here's your room key and access plate. The inspection may take a little while. You're welcome to wait here in the lobby, or you can go straight to your room. We'll notify you as soon as everything's completed." With a few more keystrokes and a final press of the Enter key, the payment was confirmed. The clerk handed back Ethan's ID card, along with the room key and access plate. Ethan slipped them into his pocket and checked his remaining balance. 1,000 credits had been charged for the inspection and 500 for the room, leaving him with 1,500 credits. He couldn't help but think how generously the Alliance handled these procedures. Still, even he, used to the costs of his travels, knew that most civilian trainers would find such an expense nearly prohibitive. For ordinary people, spending 1,500 credits at once was nothing short of extravagant. Ethan had learned that a typical office worker in the elven world earned between 10,000 and 20,000 Alliance coins per month, a respectable sum by most standards. Yet when you consider how quickly trainers burn through money on Pokeballs, potions, travel expenses, and more, a regular family's budget simply couldn't keep up. That's why Team Rocket's rise had been a godsend for ordinary civilians who dreamed of becoming trainers. Of course, not everyone who signed up with Rocket headquarters was put through the same ringer that Ethan had experienced. He was a special case, personally selected by Team Rocket's higher-ups to train their operatives. For most recruits, the process was far simpler. Complete a basic application, pass a background check, demonstrate a minimum level of Pokémon proficiency, and you were in. Getting in was easy. The real challenge was hanging on. While he waited for his next summons, Ethan decided not to waste time in his quarters or loiter in the reception hall. Instead, he slipped into the Elven Center for a first look around. After a brisk walk through its corridors, he had a clear sense of how Deadleaf City's medical landmark was laid out. Ground floor, a general treatment and diagnostic wing for routine checkups and minor injuries. Second floor, a serious injury unit with private wards for prolonged care. Third floor, a vast communal dining hall where humans and elves shared meals. With that orientation in mind, Ethan felt ready for whatever Team Rocket would throw at him next. Ethan followed the staff's lead as they explained the layout of the Elf Center. The 4th and 5th floors served as lodging for regular visitors, while the 6th floor was reserved strictly for high-ranking Alliance personnel, off-limits without special clearance. Beyond the main building stretched a wide training ground, dotted with fully equipped battle arenas designed for veteran elf trainers. Everything about the center, from its practical layout to its comprehensive facilities, felt thoughtfully planned, and the fees were more than fair. It took nearly half an hour to see it all. Back in the reception hall, Ethan waited patiently until he was finally called forward. The inspection of the 3 elves was complete. No abnormalities, excellent physical condition, and the staff had nothing but praise. Ethan allowed himself a brief smile, then approached the enclosure and released the dull beast at his side. Without another word, he led the creature toward the cafeteria on the 3rd floor. Dinner time was well underway. He tousled its downy head affectionately. "All right, you big lug," he said with a grin. Let's go see what the Alliance kitchen has to offer. I promise it's a whole different world compared to barbecued fish. Ethan heard the promise of something delicious and felt his companion, an otherwise painfully ordinary-looking creature, light up with excitement. It let out a gleeful squeal, its eyes shining and tail wagging, as if it could hardly wait for the meal ahead. By now it was early evening, and the cafeteria was growing crowded. When Ethan stepped in, a line had already formed, diners trailing behind elf attendants or clustering in small groups, chatting and laughing. His companion padded right at his side. It hadn't yet mastered using its mental energy to support its movements, but after some practice, it could just about keep pace with Ethan's stride. Still, their arrival drew attention. The chatter around them fell to hushed whispers as people pointed at the oddly colored creature beside him. Why is that beast's fur so strange? Don't be ridiculous. That's a flashy, dull beast. It's just a lighter shade. Lucky trainer, huh? Wow, it really moves fast. Isn't that trainer from our town? The cafeteria was quiet enough that Ethan could hear every remark. He straightened his shoulders and pressed forward, determined not to let the stares and whispers bother him or his ever-hopeful companion on the eve of their big journey. Ethan frowned. He knew the unusual nature of these silent creatures would inevitably draw attention, but nobody wants to feel like a zoo exhibit, endlessly ogled by onlookers. Exciting updates are coming this week. If you enjoy the story, please consider favoriting, bookmarking, and leaving recommendations. Your support means the world. Thank you.